Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was actually not my bill, so I think it was Representative Connolly who was spearheading this.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this was the committee bill requested at the last meeting, and the charge was to draft a bill to require the state superintendent to develop model policies and rules for student discipline that covered also suspension and expulsion. The bill draft is pretty straightforward. Page 1, line 12, onto page 2, line 14, amends 21-202. These are the duties of the state superintendent. The substantive amendment can be found on page 2, lines 4 through 14. I won't read through that, but it requires the state superintendent to outline best practices for reasonable punishment and discipline. And I would also note that it requires that those rules and policies are designed to maximize student retention and academic success. That can be found on lines 11 and 12. This also provides that no school district is required to adopt any part of the model rules or policies developed by the state superintendent. Moving on to section 2, which begins at line 16, this requires the state superintendent to develop these model rules and policies not later than July 1st of 2023, and it also requires that she report back to this committee by that date as well. On the top of page 3, lines 1 through 4. This act is effective immediately, and that can be found on page 3, lines 6 through 9. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
If not, let me ask two of them. And these are general questions, so you may not choose to ask them, and maybe they'll just be for people, other advocates who want to testify for us. But these are model policies that are not required to be followed. Could the state superintendent do this entirely on her own without benefit of any further legislation? And what's the reason we need to pass a statute?
Mr. Chairman, I can respond to the first question. Certainly the state superintendent is able to do this. It was a charge of the committee. The committee voted to have this bill drafted at the last meeting. I think part of the discussion was to maximize the student retention and academic success. There was a lot of discussion surrounding that in the context of student discipline, if you recall.
Okay. I think Representative Connolly, this was originally your idea. Do you want to say anything as to what the need for it is?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to the department and staff for the information and for drafting the bill. Honestly, the reason for this is our long-standing interest and concern about maximizing graduation rates and student success. One of the elements that we know that negatively impacts student success is being suspended, is being expelled. We want to minimize it. We understand that there are times that there are real needs for discipline, but what is it that districts can do well and do best? There's nothing right now that is consistent between and among districts. There's no standardized resources available for them out there. What we decided to do as we move forward, because again, as we saw this morning, our data is pretty limited. All we collect data on is what we're obligated to do by the feds, and that's with kids who are suspended, who are on the IDEA. So our first step is simply to provide resources for districts to use if they need or want them. And the reason for doing it is, the reason for putting it in statute is we have a list of obligations for the state superintendent and the WDE to do. Let's face it, that's what they do. right? They go down that list and they do it. There's nothing that prevents them from doing more. But this obligates them to do the research in order to have that information available for districts. So that was the purpose behind it. And hopefully, as we go on, it's now on our radar. We'll be able to understand better what's going on, both with kids who are under the IDEA as well as those who aren't.
I'm going to ask the committee for any questions, either technical questions on the drafting for Tanya or questions on the why do we do it for Representative Conley. And I'm going to warn the audience that I'm going to ask for public comment and comment from the department next. So be prepared. So committee, any further questions here? Seeing none, thank you, Tanya. Anybody, department, do you wish to comment on this? And anybody in the public? Department? No comment from the department. Okay, anybody in the public want to speak to this bill? I haven't heard of anybody online.
Not for this one.
Okay. Any,
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bayteski has asked to testify on this one. She is online.
excuse me,
Janine Bayteski is online and would like to testify.
on this one? Okay.
Yes.
Proceed with that and get her admitted and we'll do that.
Ms. Bayteski, you are on if you want to unmute and turn on your camera.
Mr. Chair, I'll be very brief. I just wanted to suggest to you that this is kind of a difficult one because, you know, each case that we deal with either suspension or expulsion is unique. And so it's really, really hard to draft rules around that. And I think that I know in my district, we really do promote a culture of trying to make sure that we do what's best for the student to keep them, their academic learning on par, and what's really best for the rest of the students at well. Thank you.
Representative Conley, you got a question?
Mr. Chairman, I've just got a response for Ms. Bayteski. First, thanks, Janine, for being here. And I totally agree with you that for the most part, situations are unique and districts treat them as the unique incidents that they are. That being said, there's nothing in this bill that obligates districts to behave in any particular way, but it does provide resources for districts who may need them for those best practices. And in particular, perhaps putting out there so that all districts have available immediately what that multi-tier system of support is and how it can be used most effectively.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments, Representative Conley, and we're certainly going to miss you.
Seeing none. Committee, what's your pleasure? Motion, bill's been moved.
Second.
The second over here. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a lot of value in looking at model policies. But from my understanding, I've just kind of looked through the statutes quickly, and I think there were two areas where I saw that we developed model policy. One was with concussion protocols. And this has been something I've cared about for a lot of years, just worrying about putting kids back on the field or back on the court when they've got serious head injuries, they haven't been cleared through the doctor. And so I think the legislation that authorized that was about 10 years ago. And I think the implementation of district policies has been a little mixed. I've looked into this and I think some districts have really robust and thorough policies. And I think other districts have really weak or very vacant, in my opinion, policies. The other one would be on anti-bullying and harassment policies. I've actually had situations in my district where parents have looked at the WDE's model policy and compared it to what our district did to identify gaps and have asked questions of local school board members of why there are those gaps or differences. So I think there is value in having these model policies. I think this is a step in the right direction, but I just want to offer this, and I haven't talked to the bringer of this bill, but we have done, as you all know and remember, absenteeism. I have run into another situation where I've approached my school board to say I'm taking my kids out for 5 days on an educational trip, only to be found with the lay of the land has not changed remotely in my district. You read the policies, they're going to be unexcused. If you read my Laramie One's policy, it says 5 unexcused absences shall be referred to prosecution. And I've talked to everyone and they said, oh, don't worry, you won't. And I know that I won't, but I'm just frustrated with this whole policy development of how we have really smart people coming together, working on developing these model policies, and then the follow through on the back end. So I don't want to amend your bill. I don't want to, include that, but I just really want to express my frustration that I think we rely on these policies. They need to be worded well. They need to be well thought out. And the more I look into it, the more I just see the patchwork system out there. It's hard for us to really understand what's going on. And so, quite honestly, I don't know that this bill goes far enough, but that's kind of what we do. So those are my comments. I'm happy to support this bill.
On 23 LSO-0242, Education, Suspension, and Expulsion Model Policies. Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown has left a vote of no. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermueller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Paxton. Chairman Scott.
No.
Mr. Chairman, you have 11 ayes, 3 noes.
LSO, let me find where I am here. 0241, repeal of immunity for corporal discipline. Tanya, if you can just give us the technicalities and what the bill actually does. I have a suspicion this bill may take a little time.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Again, this was a committee request at the last meeting. The committee voted for a bill draft to eliminate the reference to corporal punishment that's found in 21-4-308B. You will note on page 1, line 10, that section of the law is repealed. That section actually is not a permissive reference to allow corporal punishment, but instead it provides civil and criminal immunity for teachers, principals, and superintendents in the exercise of reasonable corporal discipline of a student authorized by school district policy, school district board of trustee policy. The effective date of this act is on page 2, line 1, and that is July 1st of 2023. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any technical questions?
I was just wondering,
Senator Ruffus.
is there anything we could do about the title, maybe to shorten it slightly so we can get it all on one page? Never mind, Mr. Chairman. Just a thought.
We could, but I think we would do violence to it. Okay. Any questions? Thank you very much. Any member of the committee want to comment before we go to public comment? Seeing none, public comment. Who here wants to testify in this bill? State Department, do you want to speak to it? No. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I will also note that you do have one individual online who would like to testify to this bill.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Ken DeCary. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Wyoming School Boards Association, and I'm speaking in support of this piece of legislation. Mr. Chairman, right now, our member meetings are going on in our delegate assembly. They're happening in Casper. That's why a lot of people aren't here from the school boards, because they have had a previous commitment. But they are, one of the resolutions they are debating right now is exactly this, is to take this corporal punishment out of that. Mr. Chairman, you know, this practice is not appropriate, it's not necessary, and it's not used. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, we'd just like to put our support behind that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Ken, thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? You say we have one online? Admit them. We'll have-
Yes, we have Mr. Jeff Jones. Mr. Jones, you are on.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the Joint Education Committee, it is an honor to speak to you today. Out of respect for your time, I've condensed my comments into this brief statement. My name is Jeff Jones, and I'm fortunate to be in my 30th year as a professional educator. I've served as a teacher, school counselor, and school principal. I'm currently the principal at Tongue River Middle School in Ranchester, Wyoming, and this is my 15th year as a principal. I sent each of you a copy of an executive summary highlighting the results of my doctoral dissertation study completed last year, entitled An Analysis of Wyoming Public School Administrators' Perceptions on the Use of Corporal Punishment in Wyoming Public Schools. A bit of background: Wyoming schools have reported 0 incidents of corporal punishment in the office to the Office of Civil Rights since 2012. Also, prior to this study, I found that 22 of the 48 school districts prohibited its use, 16 didn't mention it at all, and 10 permitted its use as per board policy. For my study, I surveyed every Wyoming public school administrator that would be in a position to deliver school level discipline. The results indicated nearly 90% of the administrators were either disagreed or strongly disagreed with the item, I believe corporal punishment should remain legal in Wyoming public schools. Also, when asked if they would accept a job if they were expected to administer corporal punishment, the administrators were nearly unanimous in responding, no, they would not. After conducting the study and reaching out to all 10 school districts still allowing corporal punishment in policy, 9 of the 10 school districts have since changed their policy and now prohibit the use of corporal punishment. I need to point out a slight correction from the executive summary that I emailed to you this morning, where I stated there were 2 districts still allowing it. I checked actually just before lunch, and that number has been changed to 1 district allowing it as of lunchtime. In the distant past, when bills were brought before the Wyoming legislature seeking to end the legal protection of corporal punishment, the bills have died. The reasons given according to the interviews with legislators at the time were that corporal punishment was not being used in Wyoming public schools, so there's no need for a bill. I believe that is a faulty justification for a lack of action. Ask yourself, what if corporal punishment was being used in our Wyoming public schools today? I would argue the backlash would be significant and ironically would actually make the passage of this legislation even easier. I will close with this. The research on the ineffectiveness of corporal punishment is staggering at this point. When I contacted the 10 districts still allowing it in policy, the response was the same from the superintendents. They had no idea it was still in their policy. With 47 of 48 districts not allowing it, this is evidence there's no longer a place for corporal punishment in Wyoming public schools. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Okay, questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so we're looking at the language, it says 21-4308B says teachers, principals, and superintendents in each district shall be immune from civil and criminal liability in the exercise of reasonable corporal discipline of a student as authorized by board policy. So I guess after listening to your testimony, I'm concerned that maybe this isn't enough just repealing it. Do we need to more affirmatively ban it?
response? Is he able to hear us?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was directed at me. I thought she was asking the rest of the committee.
Well, I'm going to ask your opinion first.
Mr. Chairman, 100% in the affirmative.
Thank you. Any further questions? Committee? Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank Mr. Jones for bringing this to my attention. He's obviously my daughter, both of my daughters go to Tongue River Middle School, so I see Mr. Jones daily. And when he told me about this, I was shocked that it was even still there on the books in Wyoming. So hats off to Mr. Jones and all the work he's done on this, and hopefully we can get this done. Thank you. And thanks for not beating my kids, Mr. Jones.
Okay. Anything further? Okay, thank Mr. Jones, and anybody else here present want to talk to this bill? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Committee will close public testimony. Has it been moved? It is moved and seconded now. Any further discussion? Any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis.
I would like us to discuss, do we need to more affirmatively ban it if it's happening? I mean, I think it's one thing if we heard that it's not happening, this is a formality, we're just removing it, but also, but do we need to make it very clear for the districts that this isn't okay?
I'll just respond to that. My thought, where you have all the districts but one have removed it from their policies, I suspect the one will catch up after a while. I think it's not occurring, so I don't think you really need to ban it. I think if you remove this, then it will be unlikely to occur again. Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm inclined to agree with Senator Ellis that we might need to look for some language and some place to put it. I don't think we need to do that necessarily right now. I think this is something where we can pass the bill, because I do think that if you remove the civil and criminal liability, you'd be pretty hard pressed to not conclude that you can't do that anymore. But there's nothing that would hold us back from putting in a sentence at a later time. We could conceptually amend it in, but honestly, I think looking into it a little bit more, deciding whether or not we think it's necessary, and then potentially amending it later so that we can have the bill clean at this point would be my preference.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you. And I think that, and I just kind of want to hit the point home. I'm a lady who's perpetually frustrated when our activity in here not being followed through in district boards and policies. That's the frustration. I mean, if this outlying district gets after it, amends their policy, super. But if they don't, then I think that we'll have to revisit this. But I'm just coming from a place of a broader frustration.
Senator Brightman.
Thank you. This be for the lawyers on the committee. If we take out if we remove the immunity from civil and criminal liability, are we basically, I mean, if you engage in this activity, wouldn't that be technically assault? So you know what I mean? So you're already going to be possibly charged with assaulting somebody's kid if you beat them in school now without this immunity. So do we need to officially ban it, or does removing the immunity and making it a crime essentially take care of itself?
Mr. Chairman, I think the point's taken. I think we leave this as it is. It's clean, makes sense. I just, like I said, frustrated on the back end with these outdated policies still out there.
if we put in a phrase right after that relating to corporal discipline in the schools. Then there would be license in the title if you wanted to put a ban in during session because you'd uncovered something where you thought that was a wise thing to do. So that would be my suggestion to the committee, is to broaden the title so that we could deal with it more vigorously if we wanted to. I don't know that we would, but that would give us license to. And remember, the catch title, repeal of immunity for corporal discipline, is without legal meaning. That's just for our convenience. The title is what you see on lines 1 to 6. So, committee, do we want to broaden the title so we could put that in if we wanted to? No desire to broaden the title to include that. Okay. Content if you want to preclude yourselves from putting a ban in during session.
And Mr. Chairman, I think I might visit with Mr. Jones, and if I just even need to write a letter to, if we know who this one district is, and say, hey, please get after your policy, and see if they'll go that route.
Is if you want to have the license to do that during general session, to put in a ban in this bill, you'd have to broaden the title right now.
I'm fine with leaving it as is. I'm fine leaving it as it is, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay, committee, we ready to vote? Question being called for. Question is on introducing LSO 0241 without amendment, introducing as a committee bill in session. Roll call vote.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0241, education, repeal of immunity for corporal discipline. Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown has left a vote of aye. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermuller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Paxton. Chairman Scott. Mr. Chairman, you have 13 ayes and 1 no.
Okay. That passed. Next, we have school district board policies. 23 LSO 0243. Tanya, you want to take us through the technicalities again, or?
Mr. Chairman, this is also a committee bill. Recall at your September meeting, this body considered 23 LSO 77. This bill is generally a replica of that bill, with the exception of a couple of provisions. Our staff, along with Senator Ellis, Representative Newsom, Representative Nyman, and Senator Rothfuss, met with a variety of folks last Thursday, I think it was, and they made a couple of changes to the language. I'll go ahead and walk through the bill and note those changes as we do so. Just at a high level, this bill amends this Safe School and Climate Act to clarify that it applies to students, school or district employees, administrators, or volunteers, and makes a couple of changes to the act as well. So starting on page 1, line 11 through page 2, line 3, this amends 21-4-313 to further define that no person includes, but is not limited to, students, school or district employees, administrators, or volunteers. That can be found on page 2, lines 1 and 2. Moving on, page 2, lines 5 through page 4, line 13, amends 21-4-314. You'll note that on line 9, new language has been inserted from the bill draft that you saw at the September meeting, in response to concerns from the Wyoming Education Association and others, to provide that the policies at a minimum must address harassment, intimidation, or bullying at schools. The discussion surrounding that item was that in some instances, and perhaps under federal law, the protection against harassment, intimidation, and bullying expands beyond just the school grounds. That's existing, I would note that's existing language in the law currently. Moving on to lines 14 through 17, again, this just reiterates that the policies must address students, school or district employees, administrators, and volunteers. The same can be said on page 3, lines 2 through 4. And then the next change that you'll see on page 3, lines 9 through 11, in the previous draft, however, formal disciplinary action shall not be taken solely on the basis of an anonymous report, was stricken. In response to concerns expressed during the meeting that I mentioned, that language has been reinserted. And on lines 13 and 14, you'll note that there is a provision that provides that the procedures have to include investigation of anonymous reports, which I really think is what they were trying to get at. Again, lines 17 through 19 is a conforming amendment with the previous discussion. On page 3, line 23, this requires that the policies are put together by September 1st of 2023. And then moving on to page 4, line 13, this eliminates the requirement that volunteers or other non-certified staff require significant contact with students for application of the protections afforded by this act. And then section 2 on line 15, this act is effective July 1st of 2023. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
You know, I have one on page 3, line 9 through 11. There's a blue line through that sentence. However, formal disciplinary action shall not be taken solely on the basis of an anonymous report. So that is being repealed, removed from the statute the way this is. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, there should have been a new draft provided as a response. This is working draft 0.3, and I think the draft.
I'm looking at point 2 that came in the packet.
Right.
Okay.
My apologies, that meeting took place late last week, and I think it was sent out by email.
So that language stays in.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Again, the change made as a result of that meeting can be found on page 2, line 9, which requires at a minimum the policies address and then the list. And then to your point, lines 9 through 11 are reinserted on page 3. And there is an addition on lines 13 and 14 also on page 3.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm having the same struggle you are, so could you please repeat the additional language?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Page 2, line 9, you'll note that now there's a provision that states at a minimum, the clause at the very end of that line. And then on page 3, lines 9 through 11, in the previous draft, however, formal disciplinary action shall not be taken solely on the basis of an anonymous report, was stricken in working draft 2, and that has been reinserted. And additionally, on lines 13 and 14, the procedures are now required to have procedures for investigation of anonymous reporting.
Thank you.
Okay. Everybody got that? That has caused some confusion. Anything else? Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thinking about kind of some of the letters and the discussion that went around, and I think some of the survey that went out as well. When you look at page 2, the beginning of it, and it's that whole list of who is included in here, and it includes students, school or district employees, administrators or volunteers. It says nothing about parents. And it seems like a lot of the complaints were about, honestly, bad parent behavior. at certain meetings. And I just asked how to think about that. And is that volunteers? But parents seem to me to be different than volunteers. When I think about a volunteer at a school, it's somebody who's going in and working in a classroom, things like that. But it is, some bad behavior is parents. And I'm curious about if there was any discussion about that.
Let me add to that inquiry before we get to answer on this. Part of the problem that bad behavior from parents often occurs off the school grounds where we don't have jurisdiction over them in this kind of setting. The
Mr. Chair.
schools can't really do anything to the parents.
That's very true, but what I was thinking of was actually school board meetings. You know,
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that we talked about that specifically, but I can say, I think athletic events, what happens when you have a parent really obnoxious at an athletic event, is it appropriate to, I mean, I think those tools are there to tell them to leave, but I don't know that. So I wouldn't say it came up specifically. But there is a need for this. And I'll say, you know, one of the drivers of this was, I had a parent who came to me and showed me some Facebook posts that a district employee had about a student in this district. And it was bizarre. I just don't think district employees should be, or I think that this bullying can go both ways. Or if you have a student who's bullying a teacher, particularly all of this in social media. But no, that's something we can discuss as a committee. But I think the hook is a little more difficult of what you can really do, or as far as remedy. I think if you've got a student, you've got remedies. If you've got an employee, you've got remedies. A volunteer, no more volunteering. I mean, but I think parents is a little more difficult. So maybe that's why we didn't get there.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, originally I was thinking volunteers was encompassing of that, and that's not the case. I think we have good examples where volunteer does not incorporate the concerns that we would have for parents, whether it's at an athletic event, school board meeting, or honestly, this talks a lot about the cyberbullying and intimidation. So the student does it, we've got a policy. The student's parent does it, and I guess that's okay. It is an interesting challenge, and I don't know, remember, the way this is drafted throughout, I believe just says that a policy shall be drafted by each school district. And I don't know that we couldn't include parents, and then that would just be part of the policy, would have to be, how do we consider those circumstances where parents are acting out of line, and then it would be a challenge to the districts. It is an interesting challenge, though. It's not, the hook is a problem. Sometimes there might be a hook. Sometimes, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. But it is a real problem.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We kind of had a discussion about, on page 2, line 1, no person shall engage in. And then as we added these qualifiers, I guess for lack of a better word, does that weaken the statute? When we say no person shall, that means everybody, everybody, everybody. And then when we add this language about district employees and school and administrators and volunteers, does that then make that contract who we're talking about? And we had that discussion during our meeting on Thursday, and we kind of didn't come to a conclusion about that. But I think the no person piece includes parents.
And you know, what's as a legal matter, the way it's worded here, saying no person, and then you get this list.
I don't
What-
believe, Mr. Chairman, it contracts the list. It's including but not limited to students, school or district employees, administrators, or volunteers. I think there was a will to list these people because perhaps they weren't covered in some school districts' policies. You could certainly include parents there as well if you'd like. The policies are required to be put together with parents and guardians if you look on line 11 of page 2 as well.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So when I looked at 21-4-314, keep in mind, we only have paragraphs A, B, and then it doesn't even have Romanet 1, 2, then we jump into 3 and 4, and then 9. But if you look at like paragraph Romanet 9 on page 3, lines 16 through 19, it says a process for discussing the district's harassment, intimidation, or bullying policies with students. And so I think when I remember reading this entire statute, it really does have that tone of bullying student on student. And so that was the problem that I discovered in my district, was that's how districts were interpreting it, as these are bullying students, not broader. So that's the reason for this. Is I get your argument, but I think what the practical effect is right now is it is limited to just student on student bullying. So that's the whole purpose of the bill.
Where a student is bullying a teacher, if somebody who's not a teacher, is a district employee, is bullying a student, both of those circumstances are covered. I'm a little nervous about explicitly including parents there, because in some other states, some school districts have regarded a parent that came to a school board meeting and disagreed with the policies of the school board. They were regarded as being hostile and were thrown out. And I don't want to encourage that kind of behavior by the school districts. It's not happened here, but I don't want to encourage a school district to treat criticism from parents as bullying.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think, a couple of things. A lot of this, I think, takes, you'd mentioned earlier about school property and all that. I think a lot of it takes place away from school. There's so much cyber and so much anonymous and so much. And then the parent thing, I never thought about, but then also I think the parents should be included on people who are told about the policy, certainly. But I mean, like my youngest son, he got a call. It was a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. We're sitting in our house. It was after we'd started a football season 0-2, and he was the quarterback. It was an adult. You should kill yourself. You're the worst quarterback I've ever seen. It's an adult, and it's a parent on the team. So, I mean, this stuff happens. It's going on all the time. And I just think, I don't know how you deal with it, but it's the age of the American whatever, where you can do all this anonymously. I think when we all grew up, there was no such thing. But I think so I think it's worth thinking about. I think a lot of these things are adult driven. They really are. And I just got to be really careful when we start putting groups together like this. But parents are the key, I think, to education and educating their kids. And so I think we all work as a team on this thing. I don't know how you do it in here, but it's an interesting problem.
Let me hold the discussion right there, and committee can think about things. And let me ask, does the state, Tanya, thank you very much. Does the State Department of Education want to testify on this bill, and do we have any public testimony? Nothing from the department? Public? Anybody? Anybody? Do we have anybody online? Yes.
Just so the committee's aware, everyone was invited. I asked LSO to set up a time. So we met last week, was it Thursday morning? And the WEA spent some time with us. The School Boards Association spent some time with us. So, I mean, I'd love for them to weigh in, but one of the compromises on my part was reinserting the language that I would have liked to have seen stricken on page 3, lines 9 through 11. That was a compromise I'd made, but I would love, they participated in that meeting. I would like to hear from them if that's appropriate, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, anybody want to speak to that? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. First of all, I want to extend our appreciation for the meeting that we had on Thursday. There was a lot of good work that was done there. The bill in its current form, we do support. We would like to see the addition of parents. We think that is a good addition, given some of the things that we have seen occur around the state. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Nunn.
I'm just curious, Mr. Mullen, could you give an example of some of those things?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman, we have heard from a number of members, school board meetings that have been pretty volatile around the state. We've had a couple here in Cheyenne. We've had a couple in Natrona. We've just had numerous reports of those school board meetings that have gone sideways. And as much as we are all expected to have some decorum in this room, we would like to see everybody have that same decorum in those school board meetings and outside of the school board setting. So.
I kind of hope that people will learn the hard way that going to a school board meeting and yelling at them and being obnoxious is a way to not influence the school board. Persuades them to go the direction you don't want them to go. But some people don't seem to learn very well. I have trouble dealing with that, because I do think as elected officials, whether it's school board or legislature, we don't want to restrict the public from telling us what they think. But I understand people can be pretty abusive sometimes. I had somebody down here wanted recognition.
It's kind of a different grouping, but if you look on page 3 in that paragraph 9, it's really just about discussing the policy. Certainly parents should be included in that. I mean, knowing what the policy is, I would think, when we get to the amendment part, that's different than the list previous, but.
Senator Office.
I think 9 is the same. I was thinking the same thing, because it's partial relative to what you see elsewhere, but it's because Romanet 9 starts with students, that's existing language, and then you add a comma. And so I think it's actually mirrored language everywhere else. It's just that's a unique occasion where the word was previously existing. I do think that I just read through, all occasions seem to work just fine grammatically and probably from a policy standpoint, but that's to be decided. If it's students, comma, parents, comma, school or district employees, administrators, volunteers. So I think it seems to conceptually work just fine if parents are added after students in all the places where we're making that amendment. Again, decision for the committee, but I think it works.
I would point out that if you do it just to 9, then you're going to discuss the policy with parents, and there's all kinds of ways you can do that. That has some value if you're trying to reach the students, you reach their parents as well. That's separate from saying, parents, this applies to you as well. Senator Salazar.
Mr. Chairman, so Representative Newsom brought the language, everyone, what was the phrase? I guess I'd like some clarification. Did that not encompass everyone then?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Salazar, I think it does. It says on page 2, line 1, no person shall engage in, and that's current statute.
So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, that seems to be pretty clear cut in my mind as to everyone.
Somebody else.
Mr. Chairman, but to clarify, so I had a situation in my district where parents came to me saying that their teacher, coach, was bullying a child, And the response they received from our district was this anti-bullying statute is contemplated to be student on student, not teacher with student. So that's the whole reason it's here. Theoretically, I agree with you, but in the practical reality, that's why I brought this bill.
Are we going to proceed with I haven't heard any more public testimony. I think we've exhausted it. So committee discussion. Are we going to add parents? And if so, are we going to do it just on page 3, line 16? Or are we going to do it there and on page 3, line 2?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll move the bill for discussion.
Okay, move it. Bill is moved. Seconded. And committee, do amendments or not? And this one, you title as such, I think you could bring the amendment during the session if you wanted to, as opposed to here. Senator Office.
Well, Mr. Chairman, certainly for the sake of discussion, I'll move to amend to insert parents after every instance of students in the list of students, school or district employees, administrators, or volunteers. So it would then read students, comma, school or district employees, comma, administrators, volunteers. So in each instance throughout the bill.
I'm unclear on the motion. It would apply on then.
Everywhere where that list is provided in the new
Yeah.
statute. So for example, you would see it at the top of page 2 in lines 1 and 2. You would see it on page 2, lines 16, 17. You would have it on page 3, lines 2 through 4 would be amended. It would be amended on page 3, lines, it would be 17, 18, and 19 because you'd be inserting on 17, and that would be it.
So covering the whole bill. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Somebody seconded? Yeah, okay.
And Mr. Chairman, for explanation, having it in only one place, the best way to interpret that is that it doesn't apply elsewhere, right? That's the first thing you're going to see is we have parents on this one, which means they need to be informed. But since it's not listed in the laundry list, that explicitly can be interpreted as, but they don't have to abide by any sort of policy. That would then be the worst possible way to have it interpreted. I would like at least the vague implication that parents are somehow supposed to not be bullying, and we would eliminate that. So I think having it in every place is important. And as we heard, honestly, a lot of the harshest bullying is coming from parents. I don't know exactly how you set up the policy. It's not as if they're going to end up having a criminal sanction necessarily as part of that policy. But how about if you're bullying at a football game, you get kicked out of the football game? That's not a bad policy. Those kinds of things. So I think it's workable.
Representative Co-Chairman Paxton.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm having a little problem with consequences and appropriate remedial action for persons. What's the consequences and remedial action for parents? And do we have the authority to impose remedial action and consequences to a parent?
And if the experts will correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding would be you would then have license to throw a parent out of a sporting event, to throw a parent out of a school board meeting for being abusive, or telling a parent that they're no longer welcome on the school grounds, if that's where your problem is. You probably can't do the stuff that is entirely electronic and doesn't occur on the school grounds. I don't know how you deal with that. But you would, whether you have the physical presence of the parent in a school facility or in some place where the school is having an activity, you'd be able to ask them to be removed from that and make it stick. But some of the other actions parents could take, you just don't have the reach to get out.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
And I understand that, and I've probably had parents thrown out of ball games before and all those, but what remedial action can I, as a principal, what can I do to that parent as a remedial action? I can do a lot of things to students and school district employees and so forth and so on, but I don't know what I do for remedial action for a parent.
Tell them they can't come back.
Well, again, just hypothetically, they could write a letter of apology if they want to come back and participate in football games to the person that they were chastising. That's a remedial action. I think there are a lot of things. You're not going to make them do it at the end of the day, but you can offer remedial action and you can have a consequence associated with not following through on that remedial action. And again, it gets back to civility in a lot of this and just providing opportunities for people to make that apology, which is a great outcome if somebody actually has the fortitude to say, all right, I screwed that up, I'm sorry. That's a good remedial action even from a parent, not just from kids. We should expect that from parents. We don't see it, but it would be nice if we did from time to time, so maybe it'll provide a vehicle for it. And Mr. Chairman, one other thing I'll note in these types of policies, we do have laws on the books for cyberbullying, which would apply to adults. One thing that could go into a school district policy would really be refer a parent to law enforcement if we think that they're cyberbullying a student. That's a great policy. It doesn't require a lot of action, but in the absence of a policy calling that out, I don't know that schools or districts or boards of trustees would necessarily feel compelled to do that. And so I think it's workable. And again, we're providing complete flexibility to school districts. That's probably too much for Senator Ellis. That's the nature of the problem we have, is too much flexibility. I think we still leave a lot of flexibility for them to interpret.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of adding parents in each of the places, the 4 places in the bill, because in all honesty, the alternative is either that we do as Representative Newsom suggested, which is honestly, we take out all of the laundry list of individuals and then the bill becomes moot, or we go forward with it to address the issues that Senator Ellis brought the bill to us for, right? Because honestly, the bill doesn't do much other than the laundry list. The language in the statute right now is no person, but we're hearing that it's not working. So if we want it to work, and we do recognize that there is bullying going on, and regrettably, that story that Representative Harshman told us about his son is appalling. It's just appalling to me. And we just wish that there had been perhaps a policy in place where as a family, you could have called up and said to the school, look, this just happened to my kid. They could go to the policy and say, look, call up that parent and do something about it. And honestly, Chairman Paxton, if you were the principal, which you were, and I was a parent, right, and had to go before you, I'd behave, right? And I would like it in your hands, all right? And so I am in favor of adding parents because I believe that a lot of the issues do at this point come from parents. As much as we absolutely want and encourage parental involvement in the schools when there's bad behavior, let's include them in that list of the bad behavior, of who we're going to first tell that this behavior isn't acceptable, and then be able to do something about it.
Mr. Chair.
I'll tell the committee, I have 2 minds about it. We've got some parents who can be pretty abusive, and being able to put some limitations on that is a help. Second, I think this bill is a help and needed, because I think that the problem goes well beyond just the students. And I think the bill solves most of that. The fear I have of reaching the parents is not from Wyoming, but in some other states, we have seen school boards attempting to suppress and get parents investigated as terrorists for complaining to the school board. And I'm a little scared somebody will pick up what we've done and think we're trying to do that, and that's not the intent at all. That's not the problem we're aiming at. And I don't think our school boards would use it that way. But I'm a little scared we might engender a campaign against an otherwise good bill if we do this. So if we take that risk, it needs to be with our eyes open. We are running that particular risk. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, it is afternoon and it's hard for us to think, but I mean, if we really wanted to go down the path of parents, then kind of in A at the end of that, this shall not include parents at school board meetings, right? I mean, you can actually carve out and make the exception you want, which I think is a valid one, right? That's a valid. Now, because school boards have the power anyway, you can clear the room. You have the police force, you can shut the meeting down. So I think you have a valid point, but if we really want to go down that path, I think we can carve that exception.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the problem with it, and that's the issue of this legislating job is, we passed that bill this morning, affects thousands of people, put money into an endowment account, and we're really talking about such a small group of people. I mean, most kids, most students, 99% are great. They're doing great. They're not doing this stuff. 99+% of employees, probably nearly 100% administrators, volunteers. It's not an issue. And so I think we got to be careful too. I think we really focus, this whole deal of bullying, it's been there forever. We were all kids, went through it. It was the thing I think that is different now. It's all changed because it's anonymous and it's cyber and it's all of a sudden your phone buzzes when you're at home. It's not on the school playground. And I don't know if we can legislate all that. And by adding more people into this thing, I don't know. You might have some unintended consequences. And but I just want to. This is such a irritating subject, but I just want to remind us all again, and folks who are listening, most people, 99%, are doing a great job. They really are in our schools. And you got these few things going on, and they're irritating, and they're not good. Are we dealing with them? I think we probably are. And so I don't know. I keep going why we need this bill. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going to your point about adding the parents and your concern, I get it, and I share the same concern, but as used in this bill, if you look at the definitions in 21-4-3-12A, it talks about harassment. It's all against the student. It doesn't say anything about school board members or anything like that. So this is already pretty narrowly, this act that we're working within is already tailored towards the students. So crimes against the student of bullying, harassment against the student for bullying. So I think we're okay there with the parents. I agree with you though, that people can, if we do put parents in, you're inviting some bombs to be thrown at the bill, so you better be ready to defend it. So thought I'd just add that.
The narrow tailoring in the sections we don't see, I think is very important. Okay. Representative Paxton.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And, I kind of have the same idea as Representative Harshman. I think there's a real difficulty in identifying and enforcing some of this stuff. Just, so much of this takes place off of the campus, away from the school. The harassment used to be get in your face kind of harassment. Now it's get on the social media and harass somebody. And do I really have the authority to go after somebody that's, even another student that harasses another student? What authority do I have to go after them, and kids learn that pretty quick, that where your authority begins and ends. I had a elementary kid, ranch kid, urinate in an alley and I brought him into the office to have a visit with him, and he told me I couldn't do anything about it because he was off school grounds. And so I told him I was going to call the cops on him instead, and he changed his mind really fast. But they learn pretty quickly how to get around it.
So, Mr. Chairman. Okay. You know, Mr. Chairman, originally on this bill, it was like a ho-hummer to me. I didn't think it really did anything. I don't know if it does, but one thing comes back to me over and over and over, and we say we can't do anything, we can't do anything. Well, what's our suicide rate for children in the state of Wyoming? How does it compare nationally? And I'm not saying this is going to move the needle on that, but is it a way to highlight problems? And yes, if we put it in law that you can go after that student that did that online, then you can go after that student that did it online. Absolutely. And at some point, you know, and I think we're all struggling with the language, but at some point, if we don't come to grips with this bullying and the effect it has, and that starts in the home with the parent, right? We're going to legislate, but it's really the parent has to do this. But we have a horrible challenge with suicide rate of our young people, and a lot of it is the result of bullying. And I don't know if this, I'm not sure this is the answer, but we've been working on this. So I'm still probably going to vote for the bill. I don't, on the amendment of parent, I can think of some horrible parents at games when I was in school. And, yeah, it's terrible stuff. But
For us is to add the word parent in all the places. That's the question for us right now. Everybody understand? All those in favor of that amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, show of hands. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. That amendment fails. I guess we'll have a show of the nose too. I think it's overwhelming. Okay, that amendment fails. Back on the bill. Any further discussion on the bill? Question is, shall the committee introduce this bill as a committee bill?
I just want to offer one last comment. I think when Representative Summers talks about suicide, I had a family member or family who came to me, their student was bullied by employees in our district, and a lot of it happened on social media. And they went to our board and they said, my child is being bullied by your employee. And there was just nothing. And it makes me angry and upset when I think that adults who should know better are engaging in this conduct. And so for me, I mean, I appreciated the discussion on parents and really went back and forth on it. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for are people who are hired and paid to work with children, not taking that as seriously as they should. And, Representative Harshman, to your point, that's the kind of stuff we're seeing, like this ugly, abusive language. That shouldn't be happening from people who are employed by our district. So this really was intended to be a narrow, at least something for parents to have a hook on to maybe investigate some of that poor behavior. But I just really appreciate everyone's discussion on this bill. And I know it's not perfect. I don't think it's going to solve our suicide problem that we have in Wyoming. But for the people I represent, I just want to thank everyone. This means a lot to me. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0243, Safe School and Climate Act Amendments -1, Senator Beitman. Aye. Senator Ellis. Aye. Senator Rothfuss. Aye. Senator Salazar. Aye. Representative Andrew. Aye. Representative Brown sent in a vote of aye. Representative Connolly. Aye. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman.
Aye.
Representative Newsom. Aye. Representative Obermuller. Aye. Representative Summers.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 14 ayes.
Okay, that bill's passed. we're running a little ahead. We're scheduled for a break. Let's deal with 23 LSO 0244, transparency of K2 personnel discipline actions. Tanya, can you give us a quick run through on this? And then Senator Ellis, is this one of your efforts as well? Okay, we'll come to you next.
Mr. Chairman, 23 LSO 244, Working Draft 2. This is the transparency of K-12 personal discipline actions. This is exactly the same draft that you saw at your September meeting. It amends the Public Records Act to exempt certain records from the personnel files. You can see those on the bottom of page 19 through 23, and then on to page, onto page 3, lines 1 through 13. And again, similar language on lines 19 through 23, and on to page 4, lines 1 through 4. This act is effective immediately. I would turn it over to Senator Ellis for discussion of the meeting last Thursday.
Okay.
Thank you, Tanya, for all the hard work you've done on this bill. Mr. Chairman, we had that work group who came together. Representative Nyman was on there for portions of the call, as well as Representative Newsom. At the end of the day, Mr. Chairman, I know that anytime we look at the Public Records Act, it's always going to be a challenge. And so, as we were discussing this bill, I didn't think there was a way forward where we would get support from the WEA and other organizations. So one thing we talked about was the fact that if you have a disciplinary action that occurs or an investigation, that never really attaches to your employee file. And so we've discussed a route where maybe I've asked LSO to maybe help me put together a bill draft for this upcoming session that would clarify that if you have certain investigations tied to professional misconduct and those involve students, how that does become part of your more permanent employee file. Because we met so late in the week, we did not have a chance to get that bill pulled together for the committee today. So, Mr. Chairman, we can work this bill if you'd like, but I can tell you, I just didn't think it was worth the time to try and make it work on the call. But happy to share bill drafts with anyone who's interested in that as a private bill for the upcoming session of the employee file.
When you have an instance where you need to have some discipline of employees because there's been some kind of a problem in schools and you have considerable public interest in it. The schools, the way they are now, they hide behind their lawyers and say, we can't say anything, and you can't find out what's really going on. And I think the schools are being blamed. I've seen an instance where they were blamed at fairly high level, where the school had actually done something to solve the problem, but they wouldn't talk about it. So we're having a real dilemma. But what you're telling me is this bill is not quite yet ready for prime time. And we would be wise to set it aside and see if somebody can come up with a better draft for consideration during the session. Is that your advice?
It is, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know that the right answer is found in the Public Records Act. Maybe it is on the PTSB, getting after, like, looking at the specific licensure for the profession and making sure there's some due process. That was something we talked a lot about. So this is a tough one, I think. But Mr. Chairman, you've done Public Records Act revisions. They're never easy. And then we raised some valid questions of, we've had concerns in my district of, whether certain people who were dismissed in the administrative level, whether some of their decisions were just poor managing of finances versus actual criminal behavior. How do we tease that out? But then it kind of started turning into a larger discussion. If we're going to look at that for just school districts, shouldn't we be looking at that for all public employees? So it just got off the rails really quickly.
frankly, I think at some point, we're going to have to maybe amend school district duties of the board, make it clear there is a duty to talk to the public about what you're doing about disciplinary actions, even if it may inadvertently identify some of the people involved. Because the current system isn't working, but I don't think we have the answer yet. Is there anybody on the committee that wants to pursue this bill, or should we just lay it aside for the time being, say this one isn't ready yet?
Laid aside.
Lay it aside. Do I hear a different opinion anywhere? Okay, if there's no objection, we'll simply lay this bill aside and not come back. Do we have anybody in the public that wants to testify on this issue before we lay the bill aside? Seeing none, and I don't think there was anybody online with it. Okay, well, that's what we'll do if there's no objection. Okay, committee, thank you very much. The question is, we'll have a break till about 20 minutes to 3. We'll have a 20-minute break and come back and work the rest of the bills.
You know, the approach to that has to involve the school attorneys because
We'll come back to order. The next bill for our consideration is 0249, School Finance Mental Health Services. Tanya, again, if you can, Matt can instruct us on what's in here, and then my notes are that Albert is an author of this, and we'll have some comments too before we go to questions.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just have a couple precursory.
Oh, okay, sure, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and committee. So the reason you're seeing this is we went through all of these interim topics. This session, I felt that there were a few things that we had overlooked, and I wanted to at least have the discussion on them. And so you're going to see a series of about 3 bills where I tried to address issues that we had heard repeatedly, I feel like, or were actually agenda items. And so this first bill is one of those, and so I'll let Tanya walk you through the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 23 LSO 249, Working Draft 5, School Finance Mental Health Services. As Representative Summers stated, he requested a draft to create a competitive grant for K-12 school districts to apply for up to $120,000 per year for school years 2023 and 2023, 2024, and 2024, 2025. Walking the bill, page 1, line 11 through page 2, line 7, authorizes districts to apply for this competitive grant to provide for the mental health needs of the K-12 population. And then it also provides that these amounts are in addition to the School Foundation Program funds, which would include special funds for special education as well. Page 2, line 9 through page 3, line 2 creates subsection B. This outlines the requirements for application, including that they need to document the need for additional funds to service the mental health needs of the students enrolled, the purpose, the plan, the services and programs, and the timeline for the expenditure of the grants, and then other information necessary and required by the department. Moving on to page 3, lines 4 through 14, create subsection C. This simply outlines the purpose, the process for the Department of Education to notify the applicant school districts. Whether the department approves or denies the application, it's required that that be made in writing. There's also a fail-safe on lines 10 through 14, providing that the awards must be made from amounts that are appropriated from the Public School Foundation Program account. Moving on to subsection D, lines 16 through 22, this requires districts to report on the awards, including the number of students and the programs offered, and any other information required by department rule and regulation. Page 4, lines 1 and 2 requires the Department of Education to promulgate rules to govern the program. And at page 4, lines 14 through 12, creates section 2, which requires the Department of Education to report to the Joint Education Committee on August 1st, 2024, and again on August 1st, 2025, regarding the program and the benefits that were seen as a result of it and the number of students served. Section 3 is where you'll find the appropriation. The appropriation for the 2 school years is 1,520,000, or sorry, 11 million. I wish it was 11,520,000 from the School Foundation Program account. There is the standard language that this shall not be transferred or expended for any other purpose, and it will revert on June 30th of 2025. On the top of page 5, lines 1 through 3 provides that this appropriation shall not be included in the standard budget bill, or excuse me, the standard budget request from the Department of Education. Page 5, lines 4 through 8, this is the effective date. This is effective immediately. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
So let me ask one. Mr. Wilmarth, how was the amount of the appropriation in Section 3 computed from what's in the bill?
Mr. Chairman, this was out of discussions with our school finance consultant, Larry Pikus. He advised us that approximately $120,000 would be sufficient to provide a salary and benefits for a full-time mental health professional. And so that is the genesis of that amount.
One for every district?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yeah, $120,000 for one position. And under this act, a district is entitled to up to $120,000. So the $120,000 times 48 school districts times 2 years is your $11,520,000.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
You want to broaden the explanation?
Yeah, if I could, please, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I think over and over this interim, we've heard more and more tales of mental health needs of students. And then when I talk back to my own districts, you know, they're patching together mental health programs, you know, which is good. They are patching it, but some of it's related to some ARPA money. You know, they've got some grants from churches. They've got, you know, a poker run, a cycling group that does this for kids. They patch it together, and it still doesn't really, I think, cover their needs. My concern particularly is in smaller districts that don't have the resources. Even though they have a smaller population, they don't have the resources to really handle this stuff. And so that's kind of the genesis of it. The 120,000 was around the you know, the cost of a professional, but the bill is not restricted to hiring an individual. You can contract services, which I think a lot of small districts would certainly want to contract services, because that's just much easier than trying to hire somebody into those. And I think if you go to page 3, the one thing that I wanted to bring up to you, page 3, section D, you know, my whole goal behind this, yes, is to provide some services, but it's also to gather information from these services. And that is, you know, what is the need out? You know, we hear about this a lot. Well, there's a lot of need. There's a lot of need. This is supposed to be money on top of, you know, you got to demonstrate that it's money, that's you need money on top of what you have now. And then what is that need? What are the services provided? You know, what is the result of those services provided that's, you know, your best guess? Just to try to ascertain something that I feel really is hard to get your arms around. And so that's where this bill comes from. And that's why the amount is what it is. And certainly as we debate the bill, I'll talk further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on page 3 in section D at line 19. It says the number of students. Now, my question is, if they have provided this mental health care through either hiring someone or through a contract, would teachers and other school employees be eligible to be part of this, or is it specifically for students? And if it is for other folks in the district, should we add that to the reporting? How many teachers or administrators or that sort of thing use the service?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Newsom, as the bill is currently drafted, it does not contemplate services for teachers or other district employees. It's strictly for the K-12 population. And I should have noted this as well, but to follow Representative Summers' comment on lines 9 through 12 on page 4, also their department is required to make recommendations for the refinement of components within the Education Resource Block Grant model. And so the timing of this program would sort of align with your statutorily required next recalibration.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you. And as it relates to school employees, I've thought about putting that in, thought about taking it out. And you know, I think both is necessary, but right now my focus is on trying to get some resources to children. And I think it's unfortunate that we are in a society today where mental health services are so needed for children, but we are there, and we've been there a while. And so I'm just trying to look for some solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious about any consideration that was given to the differences in school district sizes, given that the way that it's written right now, it's that any district can apply for up to 120K. And so we have some districts that are tiny, and then others that are unified or enormous, like where we are right now is a pretty enormous district. Natrona is unified, Albany is unified. And so I am curious about the one grant per district when we have such different sizes in our districts. So I'm curious about any consideration of that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I did think about that. Of course, being from a small school area, I realize what the need is there. I realize the need probably in Laramie County may be 10 times what it is in both districts combined in my county. At the same time, it's really hard to do it on an ADM. I think Tanya and I at one point had that discussion. And if you do it on an ADM, it's really hard to limit it, right? I mean, you could do tiers too. I thought about, well, you can do tiers. I didn't want to get the price tag out there too far. And I thought this limited the price tag and still collected, I think, some of the information I need. Maybe we need to have more reporting in there than this. You know, maybe we need to have reporting on existing services, right? To understand what is going on, because I'm not sure I don't anyway. And I've been around, I've been around this committee a long time. I certainly don't have an understanding of all the resources used by various districts and how they get this work done.
As a follow-up, Representative Summers, did you contemplate at all districts going in together on a grant? Again, I'm thinking about your small districts, and it would be hard in some ways to justify hiring a person in a school district with just a couple of hundred kids, but a couple of contiguous districts could do that. Was that something contemplated?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't contemplate that exactly. Although it is very similar to what happens in my two districts now, they kind of share programming in a way to try to get some of this done. Like I said, this was just my stab at it. ADM is obviously the best, but you can't see exactly what that's going to be. This could be a lot of money. Or you give out such a small amount of money to a small district that they really can't do anything with it, and you provide a lot to a bigger district. It's really tough to scale it, it looked to me like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think this is a good start. All the answers are not here. And for a school district like mine, Carbon number 2, where you're a very small district population-wise, but you're spread out from Medicine Bow to encampment, 75 miles. How do you share personnel? And we have trouble with that all the time with school nurses and other specialty folks that we have within there. They spend so much time, windshield time, that they don't have enough seat time with our kids. So, every district is going to be unique. And I like the idea that it's on a grant basis. There's nothing mandated in this, and I think it's a good place to start to find out where we are with that. And at some point in time, I think we'll continue to refine this as it goes along. But in our district, for example, the only mental health professional we were able to hire lives in Alaska. So our kids maintain contact through a Zoom type meeting online, which is not the same as having somebody sitting right next to you in person. And that's one of my biggest concerns with the bill, is that the availability of mental professionals I don't think it's out there right now. But I think by allowing this to go any direction, I think it might create some real innovative solutions to the problem. So I'm on and for the bill, and I think there's a lot of work to be done to get it to the point where we need it, but we need to start someplace, and I think this is a good place to start.
It's my judgment that this bill is not, in its current form, something that we can pass for two reasons. One is the big district, small district problem. And I think we're going to have an approach that is a meld where there's a certain amount on a per district basis and a certain amount on a per student basis. Otherwise, I think that you're going to have pretty unified opposition from members representing the larger districts in the state. Second, I think the appropriation is large enough. We'll have trouble with that on the floor. And I think the combination make this bill not something that is passable as it stands right now. What I'm going to suggest we think about, my school district, which of course is Natrona, the third largest in the state now, or second largest. I guess Gillette's behind us still. For years had a contract with the Community Mental Health Center to provide mental health services in schools, and that worked pretty well. They did focus on the junior high age kids, middle school, I suppose you'd call them now, but where kids are undergoing that transition, and where you have a higher concentration of mental health. And there was some concentration, I think, in the high school kids, because that's where some of the serious mental diseases first manifest themselves. So going through the community mental health centers may be an alternative, and one where we don't have to hire somebody extra at the school district level. We're using an additional resource. Now, the legislature, because in the budget cutting we had to do a few years ago, did a lot of damage to the community mental health system. And we would have to inquire as to whether that's been sufficiently repaired that they could respond to something like this. But I think that's an approach that is basically a better chance of getting the variety of mental health services you might need, provided that those community mental health centers still can get them. So that's something I think we'll need to think about. But I really do think this bill needs some serious work before we could consider it.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. So on the mental health centers, just in my own community, they're down 3 counselors. And I think the nice thing about this bill is it does allow telehealth. It does allow contracting. And so much of what is being done is telehealth, is contracting, because our community mental health centers, one, don't have the personnel and the budget cuts kind of decimated. And so that's the challenge. And I don't think this is perfect, but I think it finds us out some good information. And if somebody's got an amendment they want to bring on a per ADM basis and so much at a base, bring it on, That's what we're here for.
I'll go real quick, Chris, sorry. Mr. Chairman, my question is, I just looked up what the Wyoming Department of Health offers for schools, and school-based services pops up. Is this going to be duplicating their efforts with what we're already doing with the Department of Health? That's my first question. And my second question would be, this 11 million every couple of years, is this going to start getting baked into the budget Say, I like the idea of contracting this out, but if this is already being done through Department of Health, maybe not. But if, my fear is districts will start hiring on people, they'll get the grant the first year, they'll hire somebody full-time, and you all know how hard it is to let people go. And then this will be an ongoing thing, whether it's working or not. So those are my two questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I can try to attempt to address these questions. The first is related to the school-based services. I believe that relates to the bill enacted a couple years ago where school districts can now bill Medicaid for school-based services for students that are eligible under that program. As Tanya indicated in her comments, this is above and beyond the block grant resources, which include special education. So these would be services provided to all students, even if they have an IEP. But under even the current structure, funding structure, students that have an IEP can be serviced under the special education reimbursement, under the block grant. And then if they do choose in the eligibility under the Medicaid school-based services can be reimbursed for that type of service, it would be covered under that.
Thanks. So, Mr. Chairman, does this bill contemplate offering mental health services for people without IEPs and everybody? Is that that's what the difference is? Because obviously the school services program deals with people that have IEPs and they're getting reimbursed through that already, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, it's all K-12 public education students in need of mental health services. There's no restriction on what population could be served. And to your second point, it is not included within the standard budget. That's on page 5, lines 1 and 2.
Yeah, and would we not, this will be an ongoing thing if we go hiring people. I think we'd have to remove that particular provision as just being ineffective and fraudulent. Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curiously, LSO, what is currently in the block grant for counseling or any services at all? What is currently there that's being allocated based on ADM?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Nyman, the K-12 funding model provides counselors, and they're more envisioned as guidance counselors at the secondary level. There is a broad category called pupil support, and those can include school psychologists, counselors, nurses, an array of type of support services. And then we discuss the special education reimbursement. If the student has an IEP, they'll be covered under that type of funding structure. Those are the resources I can think of off the top of my head that address these types of services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curiously, is based on the number of dollars that are being offered to each district, is there enough money currently in the block grant to fund a full-time position based on their districts that would all be able to offer this type of service to our kids and our faculty for that? Because quite honestly, I mean, it's not just the kids that are struggling, it's the adults as well. So I would hope that it would be something that would take service both issues with our teachers and our youth.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Nyman, I don't know that I have a full answer for this. Districts utilize the block grant resources based upon their own needs and priorities. So districts today may already be hiring some of these personnel underneath the current structure within the block grant. I can't make a judgment whether or not it's a sufficient amount of resources or not. I think part of the necessity of this, or not the necessity, but part of the structure of this bill in Section 2 requires the reporting back out in a time period when your 2025 recalibration is undertaken, and this information can be utilized as part of that process to identify if there are necessary additional resources that need to be utilized or not. I will add, during your 2020 recalibration, your consultants recommended enhanced counseling services at the elementary schools than what you currently provide. They disaggregated nurses from the pupil support component within the block grant and modified the pupil support recommendation under the current law. So there have been other recommendations brought forward to the legislature. The legislature just hasn't modified its current formula. I will also say during the 2020 recalibration, that was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and there was caveats that it was unknown what that would do to schools in terms of what services needed to be delivered and how, distance education or, these mental health supports were not really on the table or discussed in depthly as part of that recalibration process. And I think the federal government's ESSER funds that have been distributed to school districts over the past couple of years have also focused on some of those supports with those dollars. And so those dollars end in fiscal year 24. This funding would extend beyond fiscal year 24. So, there's a lot of moving parts in this discussion. So I hope that helps provide a little bit more information.
Thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chairman. My understanding of the ESSER funds and the ARPA direct dollars was that these were reimbursed dollars that are available through the Wyoming Department of Education. Could districts use those dollars to be reimbursed for these services to each district? Because there's how many, I don't know, can you have an idea? I think they said half of 500 million was available. Would these types of services qualify for reimbursement to districts to provide counseling services for the children and for educators?
Mr. Chairman, the Department of Education has confirmed, yes, these would be eligible reimbursement. But as I indicated, those ESSER dollars expire or they term out at the end of fiscal year 2024. And Mr. Chairman, I would also add, Tanya has a very valid point. The ESSER dollars were allocated on a school district's Title I proportion funding. And so some of these smaller districts received very little dollars from the ESSER dollars. And this would be, I think, $120,000, I think, for Washakie County School District number 2 would exceed what they received in their ESSER 3 allocation. And so those are just a little bit more details on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this bill and the intent of the bill, certainly to address the mental health concerns that we've heard a lot about. So I'm very supportive of the bill and the concept, although I would like to explore alternatives as we're discussing right now and maybe other ways to do it. And one that I was wondering if any of the proponents have looked at is, large corporations right now tend to subscribe to mental telehealth services where basically their employees have free access as a benefit to make a phone call or set up an appointment with a mental health service provider somewhere in the country. It might be local, it might be elsewhere. And the way that's typically run is it's a subscription where the cost goes back to the company. And for it to be done well, the company never finds out which of its employees has actually engaged in the services or anything along those lines, because that tends to work better and people engage in it more. It seems that a statewide approach similar to that would potentially be a solution where we could cap the budget and try and explore it. I'm not saying that works, but I think it would be something that might be worth exploring, is a statewide subscription, we'll say, to a mental health service provider, and basically let students know they can use it as they see fit. We might even be able to let faculty, staff, and employees use it as they see fit. I just don't know what the dollars come to for it, but we could probably get an estimate of that. It's probably been done elsewhere before, and maybe even for school districts. So I'd ask Representative Summers, have you explored that particular model at all? No? Okay. Maybe we can look into that. And again, I might not get all the answers today, but I don't know if anyone else has more experience with that than I do.
Mr. Chairman, I would, in response to your question, Senator Rothfuss, we did talk to Dr. Larry Pikus about, what the best approach is. And we talked about the per ADM, and we talked about perhaps the program housed with the Department of Health that would be available, to both employees and students, as you mentioned. And sort of out of all of those discussions came this bill draft with the information that we have currently. He talked to a variety of his consultants and colleagues, and no one has a great answer for this problem at this point, and they're trying a bunch of different initiatives. But to your point, I don't know that anyone has resolved it, and I don't know that anyone really knows the need either. That's my understanding from Dr. Pikus.
One concern with the need and not knowing the need is if this is addressing students, we have to give a tool that is workable for students to utilize that are experiencing challenges. Students are going to like something like this more than they're going to like, all right, well, I would like to schedule an appointment for this Saturday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll have my mom take me. And so it's hard to say what actually works. That's one of the upsides actually to having 48 different grants available is maybe you've got 48 different shots at solutions and maybe one of them tells us a good answer, which I appreciate from the way the bill is drafted right now. But if Pikus has not provided us with a specific solution, I think it's worth us trying to explore and reach more broadly, maybe specifically to mental health professionals that might have more experience where he's obviously an educational professional. But again, I think anything we can do in this area is going to be a positive, and I appreciate Representative Summers' efforts.
Mr. Chairman, I sat in with my prevention specialist task group last week, and they wanted me to come kind of talk about this bill and what's going on. And some of the school folks were there, and they said, when there's an open slot for this telehealth process that they got, there's more hands than there is slots. So I think, I think kids are able to ask, I don't know, one, you got to be comfortable. And I do, I admit the funding piece is clunky, but I think it's important that we figure out a grant program and just let districts try some things. And I think we can then learn from that about what we may or may not want to do in the future. But I think doing nothing, we can do nothing. We do a lot of that. But I think if we do nothing, then we don't recognize that this is a significant problem.
Just kind of comments there. From my recollection, Pikus and I did have ideas and solutions, but it was not a pick this and it will work, or this is the one thing that you need to do. It was part of kind of a restructuring of how we think about our block grant. And it did include increased pupil support. It did reconceive how we think about health services like nursing, et cetera, but we needed to do it all together. So that being said, I think we do have some information, but that we can't just implement that suggestion from 2020, that one line. That is not the way that element or that process worked. So I go back to what we have in front of us. I think it's clunky too, but I do think we need to do something. When we were having our discussion earlier, I looked up suicide rates because that was something people said. And I know about suicide rates of middle-aged white men in Wyoming, which are astronomical. I didn't realize that it was comparable for our children and for our young adults. We are double the national average. So for me, we need to do something. And I think the some things that we can do, and just going back to the way that we're talking about letting districts quote unquote experiment with what might be good in their particular district. And just as an example, I don't know if any of you heard it this morning, but while I was driving, I listened to like an 8-minute NPR story about a first and second grade classroom in Connecticut that they weren't able to teach. The teachers were not able to teach. The kids came out of the pandemic and their ability to learn just didn't exist. Their what's called these days social, emotional, behavioral issues were just off the chart. They implemented a puppet program, right? Came out of a university, but it was having kids learn how to communicate with each other and temper their emotions via these puppets that they made. They found an enormous change within months and their ability to do some learning. If one of our districts wanted to try something like that, I would say, go for it, right? So I'm thinking about not only I need some counseling and whether or not I should be able to do it by telehealth or we should hire a counselor. I like the idea of districts being able to say, you know what? We would like for K through 3 that we have and can implement a puppet program, right? We could get some training on it. We could get the puppets, right? That to me makes sense. And I'd like to see how it worked. So I do see that there are a lot of issues in terms of implementing this and that maybe we could do it better. If we had adopted recalibration the last time, maybe we could have done it better, but that's off the table now, right? What we have is an issue in front of us, and this is part of the solution. So I do think it needs some work, but I'd move it forward.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't want to derail any of this good conversation. I have comments and questions, but I am curious how many people, I'm trying to hold back until we hear some public comment on it. But just with Representative Connolly's comments, I actually kind of go the other way because I don't know how we measure some of these things. And just to tell a story to the committee, years ago, I worked on a commission, and one of the things we studied was how to improve crime rates in Indian country. And so there was a pilot project that was implemented in the early 2010s where the federal government said, what if we put more cops in Indian country? We're going to do this for 2 years and then see, or did the numbers improve? And so we see this all the time in government, right? Like focusing on an area, having some pilots, and then measuring the success. And I think I like that approach. I like the idea of innovation, of we're going to try something. Is it more time outside? Is it, more exercise for kids? I mean, what is it? I don't like this idea of we'll just hire one person per district. With literacy, we could do the same thing. We could say, well, we want to improve our teacher outcomes. We'll hire one more teacher for each school district in Wyoming. Then we're like funding these components outside the model. So I don't like this slapstick approach. I think either, if we're really trying to add FTEs, adding people, adding counselors, that we should be having that conversation in the model and really thoroughly about how many each school district needs, depending on their size. Or I like this more competitive notion, maybe a smaller dollar amount that is more innovative and not just hiring one FTE, that we don't check back and say, well, what worked, what didn't. So I appreciate your comments, but I actually took it the other way of why I'm not loving how this is structured.
And Mr. Chairman, you do have right now 3 individuals online who would like to testify to this bill as well.
Public comment from the room first, and then we'll go to them.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Ken DeCaria, Director of Government Relations for the Wyoming for the Wyoming School Boards Association. I'm going to get myself fired there. Mr. Chairman, we're supportive of this bill. And really, the one thing I wanted to point out is on page 3, you have a date of August 15th. School districts already have to have their budgets put together and things budgeted by that point. So that might be a little bit the wrong time. It seems to me it might be better if you could move that maybe to May, somewhere in there, so that then it could go through the normal budget processes that school districts do. They have to have their budgets together. And so August 15th is problematic because of the budget process, but it's also problematic because you're starting school, or you're going to be close to starting school, and things are going to go on. So that's just more of a technical fix. I think, Mr. Chairman, that that might be a better date to have that awarded earlier in that. Mr. Chairman, I applaud the committee's discussion on this. I think it's needed. I think, I can't tell you that I have the answer to how this will work, but it seems to me that, districts will probably try a lot of different things, and if you, keep some record on that, we'll know what works and what doesn't work. And Mr. Chairman, the other part of this is, I think it is kind of structured that way, so at the end of this funding, it's going into the recalibration, and so you'll know what worked or what didn't work. Should that be part of the model? Should it not be part of the model? And so, you could take that, move that forward.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken, can we put a finer point on does it work, doesn't work? Because I'm reading the bill. These are hard metrics. It's hard to prove things that don't happen. I think if we were to look just at suicide rates, we can look at those. Those are concrete numbers. But I hope that's not our only metric, because we are trying to improve the overall day and emotional health of kids. But what are some other metrics we can use? Is it just school surveys of how students are feeling? Or you live in this space and you've been in the classroom. I'm curious of what are those questions and how do we decide whether things are better?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I think some of that would have to come down to the way your program is going to be structured. And if you're going to have, I would hope that they would have some type of professional advice in this. And so the metrics would be decided upon by, whoever put the program together. What is it you're trying to do? And keep good records. Because Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I agree that a lot of these programs, one of the problems is we fund them, they go forward, we don't know if they worked or if they didn't work. And I think that's problematic. With what you said about crime, and I just read a Malcolm Gladwell book, but it was talking about that. And one of the big structures is putting more police on the street. Well, does that work or does that not work? And I think that's what you have to ask yourself at the end of it. So on this one, Mr. Chairman, I know this is a long answer. I don't know if I have the exact metrics. I think that would probably be better left to somebody with more expertise in this area than I have. But I think that's probably a good thing to include in this piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Wanda Maloney. I'm with the Wyoming Department of Education as the Chief Policy Officer. I have with me Chief Hamill, who is also the Chief Academic Officer. We have just a couple of comments that we'd like to make regarding this bill. On page 2, looking at the timeline in order to expedite this work and get resources into the hands of the districts, our suggestion would be to have the grant application be filed with the department on or before March 30th. And then on page 3, section C, number 4, no later than May 1st, the applicable school year, the following review of the applications submitted under this section. That would give districts more time to be able to hire and have an employee, if that's the route they were going, or services or materials in place. One other additional thing that brings forward is on page 4 at the top, line 1, section E. The department shall promulgate rules necessary to carry out this section. We believe that we could provide guidance and compliance documentation without rules. Putting rules in place would also slow down the process, but we do believe we would have compliance and processes in place to support the application.
And what?
Guidance and compliance. Yeah. Agency identified processes. Guidance and agency identified processes.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. this is a grant, right? So you've got to be really fair to everybody. Is that going to be tight enough that you can get that done with that kind of language? Rules are, people can comment on that and kind of, can you enforce that with that kind of language, I guess?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I believe that we can. I think we could provide a very thorough grant application guidance document, for lack of a better term, and then also a grant application. It's not a competitive grant. It considers all 48 districts applying and an amount that's equal for all 48 districts, so there's not a competitive nature to that. But the rule process takes a minimum of 120 days. And so that 4 months pushes into summer by the end of session, ending March 3rd. So it makes it really impractical to meet a timeline and put the money into the hands of districts to be able to move forward with a project.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And emergency rules, how long do they take?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I'm not positive.
30 days?
Probably, I don't know how many days. I know it's shorter, but they usually run concurrently. But I don't know if it's 30 or 60 days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with all of the federal funds that Wyoming has received, I am aware of a lot of people in the education field switching and actually teaching social and emotional learning. That's I think one of the focus areas for a lot of districts. And I think the results out there are probably pretty mixed. I have 3 kids, so I hear their feedback. I hear their friends' feedback, and there are some kids who, I'll just be blunt, they laugh at it. They're like, oh, I had to go to social and emotional learning, whatever. So my concern is that we're not teasing out what we need. I don't want to dilute, if we were to go forward with these dollars, there are kids with real needs that need probably more time. But the way this is structured, we are going to look at how many kids are getting services. And so I worry that by trying to touch as many kids as we can, we dilute the ability for a counselor to really focus on the kids who maybe need a little more attention. So I'm curious if the department's received or is studying the feedback of social emotional learning, kind of back to my question about metrics, like, has that been making things better for our kids in public schools? And I don't know how to define better. That's the thing I'm struggling with.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, there are not requirements associated with the federal funds that districts might be using to report out on what type of effects. I think it's really difficult. We would probably see those metrics identified in each individual district's grant application. Typical things that we would see around social emotional learning would be attendance, grades, involvement in activities, things of that nature. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time for a system or a process to take effect. I think we usually like to see a system affected in 3 to 5 years. And so it would be really hard to know if some of these dollars are making a difference until the time is over.
Mr. Chairman, in the department's work in just studying education, I think, depending on what you read, you hear stories about, how other countries do it differently, and some countries really focus on more playtime outside for younger grades. And, maybe our standards are too heavy in those early learning years. And so I'm just wondering if there are other recommendations that don't necessarily involve hiring someone, more recess time, more playtime that we're not looking at. I just hate thinking that there's a silver bullet and we're just hiring people and then we're checking a box and we feel good that we've done something. I really want to understand this better of like what really is going to be impactful for students. And some of that to me, I don't think necessarily comes with hiring an FTE. So do you have any other thoughts of things we should be thinking about?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think that's pretty broad. And so I guess my initial thoughts are, I can't really speak to the standards piece. I think that's being grappled with, and I think you'll hear about that. But there are plenty of research projects out there and research results that will talk about students that are involved in athletic or other curricular activities tend to be have less challenges with their grades, with social emotional topics, social engagement with their peers, et cetera. So certainly there's something to that. As far as what we might see in the applications from districts would probably be tailored to what they see as their highest or most critical needs. So if they're a smaller district, some districts are so small that they know every single one of their students and they know what those students need. Some districts are so large that they probably, I would anticipate that they would focus on their most needy students. So we might see districts that approach it that way, reporting a smaller number of students that were touched with these funds. So I think that districts would be better prepared to speak to what they think they might be able to put into place and what kind of metrics or follow-up we might be able to see and learn from. But I think it would be all very different.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, one of the other proven strategies that districts are standing up that we spoke to earlier is the multi-tiered system of support. So it's a framework that addresses behaviors of students, and in looking at, what do we do for all kids? And then also, what do we stand up for those kids that are more at risk? And a counselor could be one of those options that intervene during even a multi-system of support, because they would be supporting those students either at level 1, level 2, or level 3. So that would be something to further consider.
Thank you, Chairman Chairman Scott, Chairman Paxton. My name is Chase Christensen, Superintendent of Sheridan County School District 3. There was some discussion toward, 3 is eastern half of the county, basically. Claremont. There's some discussion towards smaller districts within the state, and given that I'm here, I can speak a little bit towards small districts. I do want to comment on the comments already made. Just WD spoke to it, and Kandakaria spoke to it about our timelines for hiring and preparing for the next school year really are through the spring. And the more that we could speed this up, if it does go through, it's going to help us to have somebody in place, have a program in place that's going to impact our students when we start school that year. To Senator Ellis's point on metrics, I think that the state's got something in place. We do have the opportunity and ability to provide a climate and culture survey to our students every year. And at a minimum, I think that if a grantee was awarded this grant, they could be required to provide that climate and culture survey, and data could be tracked by the state and by WDE that way. One thing I would caution, if districts were, and I think that the way you've structured this, Representative Summers, it's terrific in terms of the options it provides districts to go in many different paths. But if it were that we had 48 districts hiring 48 mental health professionals across the state over the course of a spring and summer, I don't know that we have an overabundance of mental health professionals within the state of Wyoming that could necessarily fill that gap. We saw the same thing this past couple of years as districts ramped up in hiring literacy professionals. So one thing I would point to for small districts specifically though, and I appreciate the way you wrote the bill to provide for the gaps that exist within the foundation block grant model. For Sheridan County School District specifically, we do not have a dedicated mental health professional on staff. We don't have an SRO on staff. We don't have a school nurse on staff. We don't have a school psychologist on staff, and we don't have a school social worker on staff. These are all positions that even medium-sized and large-sized districts have each one of those filled. And specifically for small school districts, something like a grant model that exists where it is available to all districts on an equal footing, it would allow us to get some of that staffing that the block grant just doesn't provide. And to your point, Chairman Scott, on community-based supports. Our larger communities within the state do have community-based mental health supports available to their students, to their families, to the populations of their towns. Whereas in our small districts and our small communities across the state, some of those things don't exist. So where Natrona County may be able to contract with some community-based mental health, that doesn't exist for the smaller districts within the state. Thank you.
Question for you. How far is your school?
We're 38 miles from Sheridan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curiously, when you said that you did, now correct me if I'm wrong, you don't have the option of the counselor that are afforded to each district according to ADM and the block grant. Why do you not have that in 3 versus everybody else?
Chairman, Representative Neiman, it wasn't necessarily, we don't have that option, but the block grant does provide, we're funded using small district and small school funding, which provides us additional FTE just to get us to a point where we can hire enough teachers to get in front of our students. And it does not provide us the cushion within that block grant model that maybe exists when you get larger and larger as a district to be pushing funds to positions that aren't funded within the model. And we do need to make decisions based on that, but I don't have the space within what we have funding on top of my teachers to be providing a full-time mental health professional.
I mean, how many students do you have there in Claremont?
Right now, we've got 82.
82?
Mr. Chairman? Unless, if he's still going. Are you finished?
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. What's the base salary? Brand new teacher out of college.
Are you talking our base salary, or are you
Base
talking
salary,
within
your
the
base
foundation?
salary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the base salary in the model is 37,500. That's what we fund now. It went down 500 bucks.
37,540, yep.
Yeah, it went down 500 bucks after the 1-year ECA went away. So what do you pay though to get people to come teach in Claremont?
Yeah, our base salary, it's actually one of the lower in the state, but we pay $42,500.
So you pay that because you're just not going to get anybody at 37.5?
I don't imagine that we would have applicants at that level.
Yeah. So when you have to get that money somewhere, and that's maybe, I mean, you hire less FTE and pay the ones you got a little more.
Representative Harshman, I believe that's where we're at across the state, yes.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Just one follow-up question. Just curiously, as I've looked at the information, and this is kind of an aside, but just trying to help me maybe wrap my mind around some information I've seen. What is the current cost per child that your district is afforded right now?
Currently, Chairman Scott, Representative Neiman, I believe that number is going to lie somewhere between $37,000 and $40,000. You could get there. Our block grant provision is about $3.3 million. You can take that divided by our number of students and find that number.
So about, you say 37,000 approximately
Yeah.
per child?
My memory is that's the highest.
That's the reason I'm curious.
I think reservation districts are 2 and 3.
Mr. Chairman, this school year, it's approximately $33,934 per student, and that includes all their reimbursements as well.
Mr. Chairman, so that includes special ed and transportation and utilities?
Mr. Chairman, it's all in, correct?
Yeah, okay.
It does not include any outside amounts for retirement or tuition, or if they have those costs. But that's the block grant amount.
Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else here present? Who we got online?
Mr. Chairman, we have 3 individuals online. We have Mr. Mike Marcus, Ms. Jenny Arn, and we just had 1 log out. So we are down to 2 for this bill. Oh, and then Ms. Bayteski would also like to testify again, but we will start with Mr. Mike Marcus. Mr. Marcus, you are on, so you can go ahead and unmute and turn on your video.
You guys get done at like 5:15, 5:30-ish? Five. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Identify yourself and proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Mike Marcus. I am a guidance counselor in DuBois, Fremont County. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to share really quick that I 100% support this bill. We obviously a remote state. We're one of the most remote districts in the state. We're about an hour and a half from Lander, Riverton, and Jackson. And there is a high need. Just this past school year, a local community organization through the church approached us and asked us what our biggest need was. And we mentioned that we needed a counselor or counseling funds. And so they wrote $10,000 of a grant that we could have a part-time mental health specialist in our school. She's already seeing 20 plus clients in a little over 2.5 months. And so the need is definitely there. I know the average session in Wyoming is about $125 to $145 an hour. And so that's pretty expensive. A lot of our students and families can't support that. And so we're kind of filling the gap, at least short term. And so our district, I've spoken to our superintendent, our principal, some of our staff, we 100% would encourage you to pass and support this for the students and our families in our community.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your being willing to talk to us. Sir, we appreciate, I don't see any other questions. We appreciate your being willing to talk to us. So thank you very much. LSO, admit who's next.
Thank you.
I am bringing in Ms. Arn. You are on, and you can go ahead and unmute and turn on your video if you'd like.
All right, can you see me?
Okay, go ahead, identify yourself and proceed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Joint Educational Committee. My name is Jenny Arney. I am a social worker at Pinedale Elementary School in Pinedale, Wyoming, which is part of Sublette County School District number 1. And I am just logging in to also support this bill that Albert Summers has brought forward to the Educational Committee. We have intense mental health needs in our school district, especially post pandemic. Like I said, here at the elementary school, I'm currently serving over 50 students weekly. Some kids I see more than once a week. It's similar at the middle school and high school levels. And we do work with our community partners to provide mental health services. Albert has already spoke to some of those partnerships, but I am in support of this bill.
Committee, any questions? Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To help me understand more of this issue, how of those 50 kids you see, are all of them on IEPs, or do you see kids that are not on IEPs? What types of mental health services are you providing the kids?
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So currently I service 13 kids out of that number are on IEPs. And they're also, I have 5 students that are on 504s, which does not fall under the IDEA funding. Those are separate. That comes out of general education funds. So most of the students that I serve are general education, and areas that I'm serving for students is mostly wrapped around anxiety. Anxiety among our youth has went through the roof. And the kids, when they're really anxious, it's even hard for a lot of kids to even walk through our doors. And so they're not able to access the curriculum in the classrooms. And so I work with a lot of those students. Another common thread in my work with families or with students is substance issues. We have a lot of adults in our communities that are struggling with addiction. And so that directly affects the kids. And so I work with a lot of kids too who are coping with living in really dysfunctional home environments. Currently, we do have a community mental health center called High Country that provides services, and they do an excellent job. But one of the clinicians currently has a 2-month wait list currently, and we also partner with Teton Behavioral Health or Teton Behavior Therapy, and they do some telehealth services when they're able to.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for joining us today. How many students, elementary students, are there in your district so we could get a sense of?
Sure. Yep. We currently have 477 students. We have it's not a one-room schoolhouse, but it's a one-teacher school in Bondurant, Wyoming, and there's currently 2 students in that school, but I do not provide mental health services. They're pretty remote, so anything that I have done in the past is all through Zoom or telehealth.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions. Thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time. Also, do we have somebody else?
Yes, I have brought Ms. McKinney in. Ms. McKinney, whenever you are ready.
Hello, my name is Hannah McKinney, and I am calling in from Pinedale High School from Sublette County School District number 1. I work with Ms. Jenny Arney. She is at the elementary school, and I am at the high school. We currently have 340 students at Pinedale High School, and I am also calling in to heavily support this bill. A couple things that I would just like to touch on, looking at we do have a specialized literacy program that we have implemented this year based off grant funding. I started collecting a little bit of data on our literacy classroom. The majority of my students in that classroom that also need literacy help have a very heavy connection to also needing mental health services through the school district. In addition to that, when I look at this bill, I do think it's very essential that you allow the school districts to start some type of pilot program and make adjustments from there. Currently, I feel like in my position specifically, I am the only counselor, similar to the superintendent that spoke earlier. We do not have a social worker on staff. We do not have a school psychologist on staff. And we do not have a school resource officer that's consistently at our school to help with some of these students in crises. Personally, I feel like that I am putting out fires on a daily basis as opposed to preventing them. So some of these things that we can put in place with this bill would be very beneficial to service the students better across all sort of the gamuts of education. I feel like as the only school counselor here, I'm responsible for things like ACT testing, transcripts evaluations, graduation requirements, all of those types of things that we expect in the normal academic environment. However, I find myself grappling every single day with what's more important. Is it a student in crisis due to mental health concerns, or is it somebody that needs to get on path to graduate high school and be successful in college? So I do feel like something in place that would sort of alleviate some of these things would be beneficial. And I do feel like each district would be really in charge of what fits for them sort of in their own situations that they're seeing with students. We do give out a social emotional survey, and it's that school culture and climate survey, and we do data collection with that. And so I think when we talk about some of those metrics, you can look at this in a lot of different ways, not only with the social emotional learning metrics, but also student success rates and things through our literacy program and kind of looking at that classroom that I was talking about, how many of these students need supports across the board. Let's see. I do think that we have some very qualified school counselors in this state. Both the middle school counselor and I are both also licensed professional counselors, meaning that we would be able to go out into the mental health field and potentially open a private practice or work for one of these agencies. So we have the qualifications in both of the areas. And I do think that that benefits our school district as it relates to this bill, because we understand sort of those mental health components as well as the school counseling component. So I highly encourage this bill to go through. It might be a little bit rocky there in the beginning, just understanding the needs of the school districts, understanding the metrics in which it's measured. But I do think education burnout is a huge thing. And I also see that with other professionals in our school district. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I very much appreciate your testimony. I'm curious, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
Okay, so let's say we pass this bill. Given that you're one of, it sounds like, 2 counselors in your district, it is very likely that your school board is going to call you in and ask for your recommendations about what to put forward for this grant. What would you suggest?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that question. One of my suggestions is to not just treat one student at a time. There are a lot of preventative measures that you can take in things such as counseling groups. So if I had a little bit of additional resource for people to do some of those logistic things, this is just an example, to take care of some of my testing, proctoring, some of the graduation requirements, some of those logistical things that are really, you don't have to be necessarily qualified in the mental health field to do. I could have somebody be doing those, and then I can be doing bigger groups on, any kind of mental health things that we would need in the school community. And I would really gather that data based off of some of these surveys that we're giving, how suicide has impacted you. I have done 18 risk assessments since the beginning of the year. I would grab a lot of those students. I would say the main overall thing that our students struggle with the most right now are coping strategies. When things get tough, our students aren't able to work through those tough things. And so I would be trying to get as many students in those groups on a weekly basis to work on some of those sort of minuscule things, but things that our students are not able to grapple with right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is an interesting and appreciated point. What it sounds like would be a priority as you see it would be if you had the time to do your mental health work and your counseling work, which is what you've effectively been hired to do, instead of logistics and testing and a lot of the other things that you have on your plate. Is that a fair assessment?
Mr. Chairman, yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I actually wasn't hired to do any mental health counseling in the school. I've been here for 8 years, and unfortunately, my job has moved into that. As opposed to doing what I was actually hired in my initial job description. It was a lot of those logistical things, such as career and college planning. But I can tell you right now, if a student does not have the appropriate, mental health status, or really the appropriate coping skills, or the ability to overcome tough challenges, their ability to go to college and a career is a moot point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Hannah, I appreciate the coming on and providing testimony, and I appreciate locally what all you guys do to provide the services that you do provide with the patchwork of funding that you've put together, which is pretty innovative. So thank you for all you do for kids.
We actually had two more. We had one more log on. We also have President Dockstader here to testify on the RCA bill. All right, sounds good. So Ms. Bayteski is ready, and then we have one more.
Well, my video doesn't work because I've been stopped, but that's great because I look better in the picture than I do in person here. I think some of it was touched upon by the two ladies from Sublette County, but I wanted to circle back on Senator Ellis's question about measurement. I think that there are really a lot of tools that districts have available. I am anything but an expert on this, but when you look at some of the stuff that happens in our schools, the mental health issues that we see frequently show themselves in terms of bad behaviors of our students. So consequently, there are simple things like office referrals, for example, that could help to be one of the measurements that we use. There's other things like some of the data that's collected through the MTSS or the multi-tiered system of support also has data available. So I think that there certainly are tools that could be used by the districts in order to measure success. And I thank you, Representative Summers, for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Yes, I am bringing in Ms. Miller. Ms. Miller, whenever you are ready, you are in the room.
Okay, can you hear us?
Could you unmute Ms. Miller?
There we
Thank
go.
you.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me today. I apologize that I am arriving late. As it would be as a school counselor, sometimes we don't get to predict our days. And at the end of the day, I had a student in crisis, so I needed to prioritize that before I could do the work I'm hoping to share with you guys today. So my name is Kara Miller, and I'm a high school counselor here in Powell High School. I've been an educator for 13 years now, and 7 of the last have been in the counseling role. And so I've hoped to bring some insight what that has looked like just over time. And to start by just saying I appreciate this bill coming forward, and advocating for it is a passion of mine. I've also had a unique opportunity the last 4 years to serve for the profession of school counseling as the Wyoming School Counselor Association President tracked. So I'm finishing that out this last year, and I have grown quite a bit in that, and understanding how all of the pieces of the puzzle come together in helping get students access to mental health supports in our location here in Wyoming. And it has definitely become something that I am very passionate about. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and testify today. I know that I am not alone in the experience of an uptick in mental health needs and responsive services. And I caught the end of Ms. McKinney's conversation about the number of needs assessment, risk assessments that are happening in our school districts. And the same thing is happening here in Powell. We are lucky enough in Powell to have access to the SAMHSA grant, which provides a mental health therapist as a part of that. And we've felt a little bit of that come off of our plates for our tier 3 or our intensive needs students. But I think from my perspective as a school counselor, I cannot say that the problem is having the resources in the community or access. Sometimes it's, again, looking at the role of a school counselor or those that are filling that, and what duties that are being assigned or are needed that are taking us away from the ability to have that responsive and also, more importantly, the proactive approach to mental health. I hoped to provide some information to you guys from the School Counseling Association regarding the state of the profession. We did a survey through our advocacy committee looking at what is the biggest issues from school counselors' perspectives on being able to address student mental health needs. And I had sent that out last night, and I'm hoping that you have had a chance to get that into your inbox. But really, across the board, counselors are echoing that the amount of responsibilities that are not mental health or, a comprehensive model. So approaching it from a proactive point of view, direct services, those types of things aren't being put into place equitably across the state. There are lots of our counselors that aren't even aware, or those that are serving the counselor that aren't aware of what a comprehensive school modeling looks like, how we can be proactive in our approach and hit all kids so that we can build those resiliency skills and interpersonal skills that can help combat some of the struggles that our teenagers and our young ones are going through. And so I think one of the things that I appreciated about this bill is that it looks at how the districts can apply it for what fits their needs, or I hope that it does that. So I know that there are small places in K-12 schools in Wyoming where a counselor, mental health, tier 3, really that therapeutic work needs an outside person. As a school counselor, that shouldn't be our role to do therapy within the schools. And so our job is to make sure that we're addressing their needs in that moment, almost a responsive service, and then pass them off to those that are in that ability. And sometimes we have those in the community and sometimes we do not. And so I think for some schools, it might be having a mental health therapist as a part of the use of that funding. But I think for other places, for example, I even see this in Powell, we have that available, but what we don't have is the ability to get the kids access. My schedule is so packed that I can't even get to the responsive services, or I will drop kids that are on my schedule so that I can do that and get them through. So kids aren't coming in because they can't see me because I'm busy doing standardized testing, or I'm busy doing master scheduling, or something else that is another duty is as assigned versus the work that I think we should be doing, and that's responding to students' needs in states of being and figuring out how we can help them get to either a more intensive therapeutic environment or include them in the proactive things such as group work or even our level 1 sort of thing, hit it before we get to that crisis center. I would echo again that ability to overcome obstacles and cope is definitely what I am seeing as well, the skill set in order to overcome those hardships. And they're all navigating it for the very first time in many cases, and they need somebody to walk alongside them. And I'm worried that our school counselors are not in abundance enough to be able to do that, or that their time is being taken elsewhere in some of the reporting or registrar type duties that fall on many counselors' laps. So part of this is, I think, I like that it can be individual. I hope that it can be individual for the districts to really evaluate what it is that their counselors are doing, and possibly the funding is used actually to hire those sorts of support staff positions to take those and guard the work of school counseling. So that would be one of the things that I would hope maybe gets addressed here. And then I think it's also important to kind of look at some of that data that I do have and recognize that those that are serving the mental health role in the schools vary in their training. So for some, they're under the school counseling licensure. For others, they may have been an outside provider, such as an LPC or an LCW, and then they're coming into the schools because we can't find enough people. And so I would just hope that whatever that looks like in the rollout, that we have some sort of universal understanding and training of what it is that role of a school counselor is doing, and who is coming alongside within the community to support the different levels of need. I think those are the main things I wanted to bring. I am so appreciative of being able to come and join you guys today, and I'm more than happy to answer questions, or if it were helpful to give you information about some of the data that was collected and the anecdotal comments that were a part of that.
Mr. Chairman, we did have Ms. Andy Somerville join us, and she would like to testify as well. Ms. Somerville, when,
Thank previous speaker very much. And let's hear from Andy Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Andy Somerville. I'm the executive director for WAMSAC, which is the Wyoming Association of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Centers. I'll be very brief today. My testimony is only intended to support a very important piece of the continuum of care for mental health. We certainly are continuing to see escalating needs within the K-12 age group out in the communities coming into your community mental health centers. And we certainly think that the supports, appropriate supports for our professionals that are working in the schools and working on access in the individual communities for our children is incredibly important. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Funding able to see a student who gets referred to you from the school district as needing mental health counseling, or are you so focused on some of the more serious mental illnesses that you simply can't give them a timely appointment?
Mr. Chairman, so we in general do see those children that are referred from the school district for counseling. It varies a little bit in terms of how long it would take an appointment, depending on the county and the number of mental health professionals that community mental health center has on staff. I would just also remind the committee that with behavioral health reform coming into effect in July 1, 2024, children at risk in general, I won't go through all the definitions, but children and families at risk are now a tier 1 priority population for community mental health centers to focus on. So it's incredibly important that we build those very strong direct connections with the schools so that we're able to serve those children.
Representative.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I have a question. Can you describe, because I'm a bit ignorant, about the tier system? If you could describe the tier system. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, through you, the tier system refers to in the behavioral health reform for community mental health centers that was passed in 2021 and a subsequent bill that the legislature passed with an update last session. It sets 3 tiers of priorities for community mental health centers to see across the state. There are 10 community mental health centers that provide what we would call safety net services in general as a priority for all 23 counties. So the tier 1 system includes these families at risk, people that are criminal justice involved in general, and those that are at risk of or coming out of institutions such as the state hospital or a PRTF, a psychiatric residential treatment center for our youth. And that sets them as the top priority for community mental health centers to serve. Tier 2 provides for access for what we call high needs indigent clients. So there's a financial qualifier on that tier, but you're generally looking for somebody that is high needs in the mental health community. And then tier 3 provides for general access for anybody that needs to be seen for whatever is going on. But it really, the tiers are designed to focus the community mental health center's mission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one thing I'm struggling with, Ms. Somerville, is whether or not to have this as a grant program, or if this really is more appropriately something we should be having, bolstering a component in the model. If you had to choose between the two, proceeding with a grant versus opening up the model, which preference would you have?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Senator Ellis, right offhand, I'd have to take a really close look at those. One thing that we do think that is incredibly important is to provide that flexibility where we can to our individual communities and school districts. I'm certainly far from an expert on how school districts decide where to allocate money for school counselors or mental health care, but we know that it is done differently across the state. So my first preference, I think, would be to support the grant model, at least initially, for maybe a few years and take a look at it and get a better idea of the needs and what the school districts need to provide those services.
I'm going to ask one further question. Just from the way you described your tier system, it sounds to me like most of the referrals from the schools where they're seeing problems are going to be in your third tier. Is that a correct understanding? And does that mean there's going to be difficulty in getting some of those kids seen?
Mr. Chairman, I think that that's an accurate assessment that for maybe somebody that's just struggling with anxiety or depression, regardless of age, that will probably fall into the tier 3 category. I want to be very transparent with the committee. The Department of Health has not gone about promulgating rules for this reform yet. So exactly how we filter those out and whether there are time preferences or, if you're in tier 1, we have to, you get an appointment sooner than a tier 3. I can't answer that yet with this committee. But it has been very clear to us that tier 1 has to come first in terms of providing those services. I do believe that some of those children with referrals will qualify in that tier 1 category, but probably not the majority of them.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Also, does that clear the public testimony?
That is everybody.
Okay, public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your preference?
I'll move my bill.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The problem is obvious, but to me, the way this bill is written is kind of a short-term fix. It's obvious what happens at the end of that short term too. The idea was brought up by one of the members that this is probably a block grant problem, and I believe that's true. I understand the problem, but as you listen to the testimony was that the problem has already been identified. I mean, it's been specifically identified, positions that are left unfilled, 1, 2, 3, 4, people doing administrative work instead of the real work. They already know what the problem is. So our job then is to look at it from a block grant standpoint for a long-term solution to this. The idea that some great innovative things will come out in a short-term fix like this, I just don't think it's the right approach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Representative No. Representative Harshman?
Mr. Chairman, I think the timing of this is good, and I think it's going to finish up at about the time we're going to go into recalibration. So I think it's going to give us some more information when we head down that path. But all these things in society, they don't stop at the schoolhouse door. We all know it. And I know, but we can't probably solve this bigger issue. But I think this is a first step, and I urge our support for the bill. Thank you.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And that really is the intent. I think there are multiple solutions out there. I do agree that it's a block grant problem, but I think until we understand some of this and we document some of the challenges which haven't been documented, I don't really think when we get to recalibration, we'll really clearly understand it. I think this allows us to provide some additional services that I think are desperately needed out there. At the same time, we gather information to understand how we want to potentially affect the block grant in the future. So obviously honor and support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess as I've kind of listened to this and tried to maybe better understand some of the dollars and how we allocate the dollars for counselors and for pupil support, according to the information I've just pulled up here off of the crew report, right now, full-time employees, we fund 180 full-time employees across the state per district. That would be 3.75 counselors per district. And we fund those folks at a rate of $82,777 per person. When we go into pupil support, the funding model allows money for 554 and a half people. I don't know what that half person looks like, but anyway, probably fairly low in stature, but that's 11.55 pupil support per district. And we pay those folks an average of $50,856. We're currently, as of right now, we are under hiring in pupil support by just short of 62 people, which equates out to $3.147 million that we are not actually putting towards pupil support in the districts. And so if you add that all together and you get those numbers, we're spending currently on, and as I looked at it, these are actual psychologists, therapists, all this stuff in pupil support, $43.1 million currently in the model. And of that, we are underusing the money that is already being allocated to the districts at that rate. So I guess my concern is, and I know that people don't like to hear this, but we know that mental health issues are a major issue, and they're becoming more and more front of mind. And the districts have the opportunity. It looks to me like there's funding there to take care of these and to provide opportunities for these young people and the adults. My curiosity is, why are we, and I know it's a local control issue, I understand that, but you put the money where the most important thing is, and our kids are the most important thing, and the mental health of our educators is the most important thing. It concerns me that even at a district level that we are not hiring the people to be on the ground that we're giving the districts the money for currently. So that's, I mean, we're talking in the millions and millions of dollars here. If you divide it out, figure 92,000 students across the state, I think we're pouring over almost $500 per student just on services for what we're talking about right now. But we're not, that money's not getting to them. So I'm not completely sure that, I mean, while it's a good idea to try to help these kids, I think there's money there if it was better managed and gotten to the places it needs to be, even based on the current model. I think we can do a far better job for our people, and there's millions of dollars that are there available for those kids and for teachers, specifically being given to the districts for that use. And so I guess at this point, I would rather see this straightened out before I throw more money at something. So I would have to be against the bill.
Just a quick question. Just a quick question on those salaries. Are those the model salaries for those employees?
What I did was took the total amount allocated in the model for pupil support, 28. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, so that's benefits,
28.2
everything.
million.
Yeah.
Yep, and that is to be able to hire people and provide benefits, and
Right.
allow them, that would be their salary. So for pupil support, it was 28.2 million, or $50,856 per, and currently, we're underutilizing that account on its own at $3,147,000. And the counselors, we allow for 180 full-time employees in the state, and that's $14.9 million.
So that 50,000, about a third of that is benefits, so it's about a $37,000 salary.
Well,
And nobody's paying that. That's the issue, I think. And
somewhere, somehow, we're coming up with $50,856 for people to either for their retirement, for their insurance, or whatever that's going towards that. And so ultimately, to me, as a legislator, I look at that, that's what I'm having to spend to try to get people, or that's what they're offering. Now, and that's my point in this, is are there things, if we know, and which we know, we've heard a numerous amount of testimony today of how desperate the need is for taking care of our mental issues that we're dealing with right now. Districts have the ability to move money around. They're doing it right there. If that's a major issue, then let's move that money to there and even add more money that's not even being currently allocated to the actual jobs that could be boots on the ground that are not actually hired. 62 that are actually not being hired that are in the model.
So, Mr. Chairman, but that 62 that aren't hired, those resources go to pay the existing people more so they can actually hire them. Because you're not going to get a school support person for a salary of $37,000. There's nobody in the country getting one like that. So they hire fewer, and pay them more. I
Well,
mean,
and-
that's their only choice of your local school board.
I understand that, but there again, to me, when we look at the dollars that are being allocated in the model, are there other things that we as educators, that we as legislators of the districts need to look at and say, we need to pull some money from this then, if that's the case, if we can't hire enough of them for that money and allocate it to that and support our mental health and help of our kids and our teachers.
There we go. I'm going to call on Senator Office, but I'm going to first comment that some of that is that if we hired some of those people at the salaries were described, you wouldn't see some of the more highly paid professionals being diverted to other administrative tasks that the people that we could hire could do. So there's I think you have to consider that as you look at this. Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I understand we've had discussions about the funding model for years, and I've been through 3 recalibrations, and there are a lot of challenges there. There's certainly a lot of challenges related to class size and what the model funds for salaries versus what actual salaries are, and number of people that are employed as a result of this. But one thing that was an important theme in the last recalibration, which again we rejected because we effectively didn't adopt the last recommendation set by Pikus and Odden, was a new emphasis on increasing the number of employees that we have in our school districts to support mental health and wellness. That was a significant part of their recommendations, that it's not as if the committee said, well, those recommendations are wrong. It's just, Mr. Chairman, that we didn't adopt that new model. And a large part of the reason was those recommendations came in at, I want to say, $70-ish million for the biennium, higher than what we were funding at the time. And a substantial amount of those resources went to mental wellness. We can go back and check the actual numbers. So here we are. We continued to maintain the prior funding model. As a matter of fact, not the prior, it's been in place since 2011, I think, is effectively the same model we're using with some revisions to the ECA that we know is insufficient in these spaces. So while we are under hiring to the positions that are in the model from a little over a decade ago, even that model is insufficient relative to what the most recent Pikus and Odden recommendations were. So from that standpoint, this is a bit of a patch. It's true. I mean, this is not a perfect piece of legislation. We've all got some concerns with how it's structured, but we're short in mental health and wellness. We know that. We don't provide enough resources. We don't have enough people, and we don't serve the needs of our students or our education employees throughout the state. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that there are criticisms of this approach and that there may be ways to do it better. What I don't see, though, is that solution of how to do it better. So we have real needs. We have an incredible suicide rate. We have challenges and struggles, and that is what we hear about as the highest priority. In the absence of a better solution, I'm going to support this solution, Mr. Chairman, but I welcome a better solution if it is going into the funding model and finding a way to provide more resources through the funding model on a per ADM basis, reflecting on the Pikus and Odden recommendations from a few years ago. I'm in, and maybe it's a third concept, but this is what we have before us. We've identified a need. It's perhaps an imperfect solution, but it moves us towards better mental health for our students. And the reality is the students aren't waiting around for us to come up with a better solution to have their mental health crises. That's just not how it works. They're having them now. We need to be responsive and provide solutions soon. And I'd welcome anybody's recommendations on how to improve this bill, but we have to have something to move forward.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I was looking back through my emails, and I think most everybody on this committee received an email from 2 sophomores at Burns High School. And the solution they gave to us, and I know one of these young ladies, and a suicide rocked their school. and they were talking about attendance policies. And she says, attendance is important for students, but what about mental health days? And they talk about policies that are state laws. And they write, action must be taken. Below is House Bill 2191 from a different state. And it says this bill will allow mental and behavioral health days to be counted as excused absences and tracked by the school counselors in order to provide support and resources. So when we talk about hearing from students, I don't know about you, but I read this and I thought about it. I'm exhausted talking about absenteeism, but I think we do have options. And I just don't think we've looked at the universe of what we could be doing if it is talking about mental health days and improving mental health. So I do have my reservations about just saying $11 million is going to make a dent in it. We don't know what metrics. I certainly would hate if we went down the path of starting to tie this to academic performance. I do think there's a link there. But in doing just some cursory research on this, the CDC measures things like suicide, but also depression, anxiety, other metrics of health. I just don't even know that we've identified what targets we're looking at. Like, what is it we're trying to accomplish other than just kind of putting a pot of money out there. So I think until we do our homework and come up with a little more tailored approach, I just worry we're not going to get the results that we're seeing. We're going to see another request in the future to just expand this and put it in the block grant model. And then from there, who knows how those dollars are spent. So I think the problem's there, but I don't think we're close to quite finding that solution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that, we're delving into healthcare on the Education Committee. And I think we have the two largest budget items in the state budget is Department of Health and K-12. And now you guys are competing over mental health budgets and everybody wants to do mental health. Everybody wants to throw money at mental health. But I'm of the mind that we have a Department of Health. We're throwing a lot of money at mental health through the Department of Health. I think that's their bailiwick. I think they should be the ones providing school support on a contract basis and build off of what we're already doing and not adding to the block grant more money. Like Senator Ellis just said, if we pump this into the block grant, it disappears and it can be used for anything. We can rob Peter to pay Paul, and that money's not necessarily going to go to mental health. It may in some instances, but we have no control over it. Once it leaves our hands and goes to the districts, we have no control over it. Department of Health, we have control over their budget. We can measure their success. If their efforts are working, we can see that. So I think this is the wrong approach. I think it's just encroaching more into their area, and it's also encroaching in some of the parents' responsibility. If my child needs mental health, I need to make that appointment for my child and get that child mental health on my time. It's not the school's job. I want the schools teaching my kids reading, writing, and arithmetic. I know it's probably controversial nowadays, but that's where I'm at, and that's why I don't support this bill.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to clarify just a previous kind of comment regarding kind of the notion that we're throwing money at mental health. I'd just like to remind the committee that in fact, the mental health reform that we're going through right now is designed to curtail the amount of money that is going to mental health services in the state by prioritizing the populations that will get mental health services. So we're really decreasing the amount. We might be talking about it a lot, but again, it's about that priority population, which is, in all honesty, about justice related, right? Those who are involved in the criminal justice system are that priority tier 1 population. So I think that we need to be real clear about the need, which we've identified, and then what our state role is, and that it is not right now through the Department of Health with the kind of issues that we're talking about right now. It really is something that we, as this committee, are obligated to be thinking about and to be thinking about it well. And I will support this bill because it does make an attempt to fill in what we should have been doing with our last 2 recalibrations and haven't. So I would encourage the committee to support it, and that we will address it again with the block grant when we do recalibration, I think in 3 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And one thing that we have not discussed here, and all the efforts to try to kind of attack this issue that we're dealing with mental health, is nobody here has discussed the potential of the community of faith that is willing and ready in every community. I don't care how big your school is or as big your district is. Spiritually, these kids need hope, and these people need hope. And just for example, I also read that email from those young ladies in Burns. The only thing I could look to do, and it's called Hope Always, Wyoming. And it's not a specific religion, it's all faiths that are providing, standing at the ready and the will to offer their services to school districts, to offer kids, hope, and teachers hope. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. I don't think that just throwing money at this is going to work. These folks are not asking to be paid to go over there and help those kids, or to pray with them, or to just encourage them that they're irreplaceable and there's no one on the earth like them. And I think somewhere and somehow in this legislation, we've got to come to a point where we can say, you know what, we need to embrace more people out there that have got real answers to what people are struggling with. And this whole conversation is wrapped around people that are hopeless, are dealing with anxiety. And I think that needs to be a part of this too, at some point in this, if not first, but at some point it has to be recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I appreciate all the good debate. I know in our community, we are, the school district and our prevention specialists are engaging the faith community, and they are putting money into this, but it's not enough. They don't have enough money to help do this work. And it's a patchwork, and this is just a patchwork to try to help these people they're overloaded. And you can give me all the numbers you want in the block grant, who's using what for what, but I talk to the people on the ground and they're overwhelmed. And we need to provide just a little bit of help, re-examine this and recalibration. I totally agree, and that's why I do the grant program. I think every community will have a little different means by which to solve this, and this is just provides some money to help solve that within the construct of an individual community. So on in support of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I know that our sun's starting to set. I just think a couple things. I think the colleagues I work with do pray for their students. I got one kid I know, I prayed for him daily. Stuff going on in his life, it ain't about parents. There isn't any of that stuff. Last year in the Trona County School District, 300 homeless kids. That's bigger than your town. It's way bigger than your school population. And that's just, you need people to work this. And those problems, you can't say, hey, you just came to school, all your problems are over. They all come through the front door. So many kids, it's the only safe place. Only place they're getting fed or clothing and I just think just this little bit of help in each district, I think, can do this differently. Some will contract some help, some will with with different, every town is different with different needs. And I just think we've got $1 billion surplus in K-12. Do a one-time grant and see if it works a little bit. See if we can get some metrics that, hey, this program worked. And so I just think, to me, it's worth that chance. And I just, and I get it. I'm in that business, and I see that used to be the thing. Boy, this is a parent's deal. I agree. My parents had hot meals every day I went to school. Cooked my kids the same every day. But it's a different deal. And I think it'd be really good for members of this committee, go spend a day or a week with your guidance counselor. Walk around school all day. It's a different deal than when we all went to school. And I'm not saying that most of the kids are doing great. Don't get me wrong. Most of the parents, kids, everybody, there's more, but there's some really tough deals. And we got to be able to help those kids. Because if schools aren't, I don't know who else is going to. So anyway, on and for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Also, the question is, shall we sponsor the bill of the committee? Call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0249, School Finance, Mental Health Services, Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar, Representative Andrew, Representative Brown sent in a vote of aye, Representative Connolly, Representative Harshman, Representative Nyman, Representative Newsom, Representative Overmuller, Representative Summers, Co-Chairman Paxton, Chairman Scott. Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes and 6 noes. Yes, he did. He voted aye.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 23 LSO 250 School Finance Regional Cost Adjustment Working Draft 0.4. This act relates to school finance. It modifies the regional cost adjustment, allowing for the use of the most recent semi-annual index report completed by January 1st of the immediately preceding school year. Recall, under the school finance model currently, it authorizes for purposes of the regional cost adjustment, the greater of the hedonic wage index, 100 on the WCLI, or the WCLI as measured by the biennial, 3 years, or now under this bill, the most recent semi-annual index completed January 1st of the immediately preceding year. And I would draw your attention to page 4, lines 1 through 5. This is the substance of the amendment. The rest of the bill really contains those noted provisions regarding the application of the regional cost adjustment within the Education Resource Block Grant model. And this act is effective July 1st of 2023. That can be found on page 4, line 7.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And the reason you're seeing this bill is this was an agenda item we had early on about the cost of housing right now. How do we house our school district employees, what to do about it. And I realized, there wasn't an easy answer. And then when I got to digging into the regional cost adjustment and realized that we were using the greater of basically a 3-year average, I believe that's what it is, isn't it? Yeah, 3-year average, basically the greater of a 3-year average. I was thinking, well, when we're having these really inflated prices, we should look at the most recent. And then the reason I left and/or in, because, as you shrink away from maybe the highest price, if it starts to fall, there's still going to be people that are, you need to keep that average up, I think, on the downside. But on the upside, I think you need to look at the most recent report. And I think, I believe, did Matt, are you going to go over the financial piece of it? It affects basically 2 districts and the one we would assume that it would affect. And so that was the reason behind it. I thought it was a simple solution. It doesn't get to all of our districts, but I think it hits the very, very high impact districts. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just to add on to some comments on the bill and the estimated impact. How I look at this is for those districts that utilize the Wyoming Cost of Living Index, this would provide for an elevator up and the escalator down. Currently, the escalator is used for the WCLI on both increases and decreases. This would allow for those increases impacted by the WCLI to be felt immediately. And for next school year, this bill would impact 2 school districts. And this would be Lincoln County School District number 2 in Afton and in the Star Valley area, and then Teton County School District number 1. Lincoln number 2's regional cost adjustment would increase 3%, so their personnel would be adjusted 3%. Their salaries would be adjusted 3% for next school year. And in Teton County School District number 1, their salaries would be increased 1%. And estimated impact on that in total would be approximately $850,000 statewide. In the form of a kind of a fiscal note analysis, you would see an expenditure increase of $650,000 for Lincoln County School District number 2, and a recapture revenue decrease of $200,000 in Teton County School District number 1. So in terms of, how to think about that in fiscal note terms.
Material. There's a memo from Matt that goes through that in a little more detail. And I found that to be very useful when I worked this up. Any questions on the technicalities here? Okay, let me ask one. This will last until the next recalibration, and then we may or may not change things at that point. Is that right?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Under your current RCA formula, districts are provided the greater of the 2005 hedonic wage index. That is not adjusted on an annual basis. That's a set amount. Your WCLI is adjusted on an annual basis by the Department of Education to account for the most recent information on that index. The legislature would have the opportunity during its recalibration or any other legislative session to adjust its regional cost adjustment.
So what we're doing here is saying in this high inflationary period that we're in right now, that we can go up faster because we are getting in inflation trouble in particularly these districts that are relying on this index. Is that a correct summary of the bill? I'm looking both to Albert and Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this will impact school districts that utilize the WCLI as its regional cost adjustment. So the 2 school districts or the 2 counties in the state of Wyoming that have experienced greater impacts to its cost of living index will utilize the WCLI.
Okay.
And just a quick, Mr. Chairman, I kind of patterned this after the ADM piece, right? We do ADM on the rise if it rises, but then if ADM drops, we do it on it's kind of the greater of the average. So it was kind of patterned after that to try to catch the rise because we know we need the money up front and then let it slide back down slower.
Frankly, I've ignored the part of it coming down because I don't think it's going to, at least not in the foreseeable future. I think we've settled that for a couple of years. We're going to have inflation.
Mr. Chairman, as well, this is not time limited in direct response to your question. It is not time limited.
It is not time limited, but we will look at it again every time we do a recalibration, but we not probably. Okay. Committee, seeing no further questions, I want to go to public comment. And LSO, we do have some people waiting online.
Yes, we have President Dockstader, and then we also have Ms. Bachetsky back.
Okay, let's deal with those 2 first, and then we'll come to the audience. Dan, if you can hear us, introduce yourself and we're on.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for giving me some time. Dan Dockstader, Senate District 16. Lincoln and Teton counties. Obviously, that's why I'm here. So we got a Craig report shows Teton and Lincoln, they're helping to fill the coffers, but it also creates this challenge, folks, that we're having a hard time recruiting and training employees just because of the cost of living. I'm going to start up on the north end of the canyon, Teton 1 first. They found it takes too long for the RCA to update, so they don't see an increase in the years ahead. For example, they're funded currently at 162%, yet the RCA is at 165%. By the time they see 165%, they'll probably be at 170%. So it's hard keeping up. One point they took 2.5 out of reserves, 2.5 million, loaded the front end of RCA, and to help it increase and give their employees a little bit of help in the inflationary period that was just recognized. External factor that we have here, the cost of housing north of the canyon, it's kind of off the charts if you can find a place. You're trying to support a workforce in a situation where, for example, one of the box stores is paying $24 an hour for unskilled labor, while the school district's paying less than that for trained bus drivers who are licensed. Average 2-bedroom home north of the canyon, $4,400. That's an increase of $2,800, 2-bedroom unit. This accounts for 47% of the RCA. This also means a teacher is spending more than 50% of their income just on the housing alone. Let me take you south of the canyon now, folks, Mr. Chairman and committee. Go south of the canyon, Lincoln County, Lincoln 2. If an employee can find a home, that's the first step, let alone how much it's drastically increased. And I'll give you a number here in just a moment. Our district lost out on hiring 4 teachers last spring, just simply due to the cost of living. They were offered teacher contracts, but they were unsuccessful in securing housing. There wasn't anything out there available for them, anything affordable, and it's still that way now. Last spring was the first time that they were not able to recruit and enter a teaching contract for someone we used to poach from the Wasatch Front all the time, and now they can't afford to live up here because it's cheaper down on the Wasatch Front. District RCA is based on the district, Lincoln 2's district is based on Afton data, but yet it's even a little bit more when you get up in Thane, Etna, and Alpine in that area of our valley. We conclude here, last spring, we had 3 teachers separate from the district simply because they could no longer afford to teach here, the cost of living. Our last economic report comes from our bank. They do an annual economic report of this valley. And I texted the bank president just now to make sure where I was at. The average home price right now in Star Valley is $720,000, unheard of. So that's where we're at, and that's why we're seeking some support for this RCA adjustment. Thank you.
Committee, any questions for Mr. President? Okay. Seeing none, Dan, thank you very much. That quite enlightening testimony. We appreciate it. LSO, can you introduce the next person?
Yes, we have Ms. Bayteski back, so whenever you are ready.
Okay.
Thank you. Janine Bayteski from Teton County, and I don't have a lot to add to what President Dockstader said to you. He really did a pretty nice job, I think, of encapsulating what our situation is. Just to put into perspective, though, this $2.5 million we took out of reserves to upfront or front load the RCA for our teachers, that's $2.5 million out of $8.5 million. That does not leave us with a lot of reserves. And I think, Mr. Chairman, to address your comment about this will never go down, I don't believe that to be true. In fact, in December of 21, we were actually at 168%, and we're down to 165 now. And I think as you see housing come online, and there's a lot of housing projects that are being approved and are moving forward in Teton County, I think we will see some of that adjust. But as the president has said, we have basically taken our issue and it has moved down south to Lincoln 2. So we certainly appreciate Representative Summers bringing this forward, because I think it would really offer some assistance to us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Audience, anybody here want to speak to this bill? Anybody here want to speak to this bill? Seeing none, committee, what's your pleasure in the bill?
Move the bill. Second.
Motion is due pass Summers, second by Paxton. Any further discussion on the bill? Any amendments? Question is being called. I think we exhausted the committee with the previous bill. Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is, are we going to take this bill to this session as a committee bill? Call the roll, please, Allison.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0250, School Finance Regional Cost Adjustment, Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown voted absentee aye. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Overmuller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 13 ayes and 1 no.
Okay, that bill will go forward. Committee, that's the last bill I see on the agenda for today. Albert, you had.
Mr. Chairman, and I think you'll be doing a little something tomorrow, but our good friend, Chairman Paxton, tomorrow will be his last meeting, and I'm sure there'll be salutations tomorrow as well, but I just want to tell him what a pleasure it has been to serve with him. I get emotional. It really has. He's been a good friend for a long time. And to that end, we're going to tip a beer for him at the Met tonight at 6. And we have a little table set up there. And so anybody would like to come and say some final words to Paxton and give him a going away and have him watch him drink a beer with him, I'd encourage you all to come. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chair? I was just curious if the first round's on you, Albert.
Certainly the first round for Chairman Paxton is on me.
No problem.
Okay. Committee, we're due back at 8:30 tomorrow morning. So seeing no further business, we're adjourned for the day.